Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Coach Kurt with the Alpha Scully Fight Team. I'm hosting here on the Fight House Talks podcast here on a wonderful Saturday afternoon, where everybody's at. Coming here from Homer, Alaska. Today, I am joined by Coach Jen Marie. She's a phenomenal Krav Maga instructor, personal protection, self-defense, and an excellent advocate for women's self-defense. So today, we're going to really dive into the subject matter of self-defense from the perspective of a woman for women, because the one of the things that we run into within the personal protection self-defense martial arts community is this idea of men telling women how to defend themselves against men. It's a common problem, and there's some arrogance involved with some male instructors, and there's some enlightenment from others. But today, we're going to dive into that subject matter and see how we can problem solve through that. So I'm going to bring my guest up, and here we go. Good
Hi.
afternoon. How's it going?
Good afternoon. Oh, this is so great.
Yeah.
How are you?
So I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I had a lovely Saturday morning with my children, mowing the lawn. So, and now just kind of like enjoying the rest. It's sunny outside. So here we are.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got to actually get in a little workout while my kids were sleeping,
Nice.
which is the only thing I need to really do to feel productive during the day.
That's
So
fair. That's fair. And we
I'm
got them
like, at least I
fed.
got my workout in. Yes.
Yeah. Well, Jen, let's introduce yourself to the community here. So I have a number of interesting viewers specific to like the Filipino martial arts community, but we also have a wide range of people who join us in this podcast. So they may not be exactly familiar with what you do and your particular background. So let's go ahead and dive into that for a little bit, and then we can like dive into today's subject.
Yeah. And I, like we kind of talked about, like it's a pretty candid conversation. So I really actually got started in martial arts because of a domestic situation in which my ex was using, and he had a violent outburst because that's what happens.
Yeah.
And he smashed my head into the back of a car door.
Ah,
And so I had staples in my head, and as you can imagine, no one was there to protect me.
yep.
And I couldn't even protect myself. And I kind of froze. Then I kind of fawned a little bit, like, I don't want to fight. I don't want to do this. I need to go to the hospital.
Yep.
It was nothing that none of the behaviors I wanted to display. I wanted to, say that's unacceptable. I'm calling the police on you. Like, no,
Yep.
you cannot touch me. And all the steps prior, before it even happened,
Yeah.
noticing all those red flags before it gets to that point. And so I had to really ask myself, like, I wanted to be that person. And so I needed to go figure out how to be that person. And since the situation was so traumatic and profound, I just picked self-defense. So I
Oh,
picked Krav Maga, did some Google, and
nice.
I walked in and I was instructing and taking tests within months and started. I mean, that's about when I went to Israel for the first time.
Oh, nice.
I got to do be in their seminars at their 50th anniversary at the Wingate. It was a really
Wow.
cool experience. Yeah, it was like there were instructors from all over the world in every martial art that you can think of. And I absolutely love Kali.
Hmm.
And I love, oh my gosh, of course, I'm going to forget it right here, right now, but the dancing art, Brazilian dancing art,
Capoeira.
capoeira. Yes, I can't believe I would forget
Ananawe.
that ever. Yeah.
Nice.
And so I was introduced to different martial arts that way. And then from there, I really fell in love with Muay Thai just because of the stand up. Krav Maga integrates Muay
Yep.
Thai quite a bit. And so I started then fighting Muay Thai.
Nice.
Yeah, and that just seemed like the natural progression to learn how to fight in the street. I really felt that I needed to fight I needed to challenge myself to real fights,
Hmm.
in controlled spaces, I will say that, in very controlled spaces. So, and then from there, I started getting beat up a lot on the ground in
Hmm.
my training, and I noticed a huge deficit, and so I started doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and
Nice.
then from there went on to earn my purple belt, and
Nice. Congrats.
hopefully one day we're gonna go for broke there, but as of right now, I'm comfortable where I'm sitting. It's a good space.
Purple belt's a good place to grind, as I understand. I'm not belted in jujitsu, but I have quite a bit of a background in it. So, and
Mm,
I have a fond appreciation for the grind. That is the difference between purple and brown. And brown is really you're just putting in your training time, your coaching time. So,
yeah, I felt like white was so exciting. It was
mhm.
just so exciting to get like my first stripe or my first, yeah. And all the way up until I got my blue belt, it was just amazing. And then my blue belt, I was like, but if I got to purple, then I would be taken more seriously.
Yeah.
Is and I was, of course, like I was very young and naive, and I get my ass kicked by blue belts all the time now.
Hey,
But now that I'm getting older. But yeah, then I fell in love with that. It was just started competing in jujitsu, and I didn't look back on that either. So yeah,
that that's awesome. Congratulations.
thank you.
Because one of the beautiful things that martial arts can do
Mhm.
is come from a point of fear and catastrophe and create a community and an opportunity for somebody to find success and
Mhm.
peace. It's really interesting that what martial arts can do, like the very basis of we are learning human combat, we're learning
Mhm.
effective, efficient human violence, and we're
Correct.
actively participating in a controlled space. But the mindset of that violent nature of learning to handle this
Mhm.
so we can defend against it. And
Yeah.
what that does is you get an incredible amount of peace as a result of it because you've gone
Mhm.
through the process. You learn that
Right.
accountability. And also, what martial arts can do, having gone through the fighting process, is you develop a higher capacity, maybe for compassion, because you learn how vulnerable that the human frame can be and how vulnerable a human can be, but not just physically, but the emotional state. And there's power in that journey. So I congratulate anybody who starts from a point of catastrophe and
Mhm.
finds success afterwards through that process and finds that peace, because some people just don't make it, and it's very unfortunate, but when people do, and they become a leader, and it's powerful. So congrats.
Right. Right. Thank you. And to your point, trauma responses are so different across the board. And I'm not a mental health professional, but there is
Mhm.
a concept called a not only growth mindset, but growth after trauma, like
Yep.
trauma growth,
Yep.
I guess. And I think that that was kind of what happened to me was just so lucky enough to have that experience, have a lot of introspection,
Hmm.
and from there just I realized that it was paradoxical to go through it
Hmm.
in order to know it so effectively that I could walk in, like I could be peaceful, you know. It wasn't just an input thing, it was also an output thing. I wanted to be more controlled in my emotions and more controlled in my anger, so that
Yep.
because I've always been scrappy and I've always been down to fight.
Hmm. Yeah.
And it is something in the blood, it is something in the personality that you get to the levels that you are, I am. And it isn't normal
Yeah.
for the majority of civilians. It's not normal.
Yeah. It's to dedicate oneself to such a hard life takes an interesting type of person, and this is where and talking about retrospective viewpoints as to where we are now. I
Mhm.
have to had to look where I was before, and in the overall scope, this is where I often question what is the why and
Yeah.
what is the why we fight. And this is helping me understand violence, the nature of violence, and my own capacity and purpose attached to violence, knowing that it is not my purpose to be violent, but to understand how violence has been a currency, has been a crutch, and
Mhm.
has been a great evil, but it has also been a means of which I have developed an interesting sense of empathy. And I'm
Yeah.
not alone in
Yeah.
that because, again, people who have seen incredible amounts of violence, I believe, have a higher capacity for empathy.
I I I tend to agree. I also think that it's interesting that you say it like that because I've seen different scenarios, especially in somebody like my like father, for
Hmm.
example. He was very volatile and violent because his father was violent. So you had this generational trauma that
Yep.
kind of continued down, and it still landed with me.
Yep.
But where I redirected it, where I forced that energy, was what mattered to me. And
Yep.
I wanted to fight, which is not something that a lot of people really want. And for me, it did. It helped increase my empathy. It helped
Hmm.
increase my understanding. It helped it helps show me that we're all just one thing trying to figure it out, living this life. We have to consider that violence is going to and has always been a huge part of this physical world that we live
Hmm.
in, and to ignore it and to turn away from it is service to no one.
Yep.
Not yourself, not your children, like not your baby girls, not your sisters, not your nieces, not your mothers, and not your fathers either. Like, men, statistically, 1 in 4 are just as likely to be, you know uh essayed. And I don't know what we can say on here, but you
We
know
have we're raw, unfiltered, uncensored, up until the
yeah.
point Facebook and the algorithm says no. So
Yeah, and but like you were saying earlier, my empathy for men in some situations has shortened my fuse. I will no
mhm,
longer appease certain behaviors
mhm,
simply because I have trained violence. And I think it's a good thing because where my boundaries are, when you know when it's the time, when you know when it's the answer, it's a good gauge for anything in life and you can apply it to everything.
mhm.
Knowing where you end and something else begins is crucial in knowing who you are. And I felt that violence gave me it gave me that sense of anonymity and peace.
Yeah. So what's interesting, there's a wonderful TED talk by Tim Larkin that I reference all the time. And the
I
very
love it.
basic title is When Violence is the Answer, It is the Only Answer. And that's really hard for people to stomach because,
Mm-hmm.
one, they don't have that mindset and their scope of reality isn't as such where they've had to deal with real world violence. Because a common issue that we find within the martial arts community is you have the people who actually will deal with violence professionally and personally because of either life circumstance and job. Then the
Mm-hmm.
majority of the people that participate in martial arts are there because it's something to do. And like
Mm-hmm.
the reasons why aren't as tailored towards the scope of reality of actual violence. Because coming from a
Mm-hmm.
middle class American viewpoint, who for the soccer mom with her kids going down to the local dojo, the reality of violence for them may not be so apparent comparatively to
Yeah.
somebody in the industry or somebody coming from a trauma informed background or professionally has to deal with this. The reasons why vary, and that's a part of figuring out what is the why, and from the why
Mm-hmm.
you can figure out the boundary of what am I willing to do. Because so one of the philosophies that my family uses, in particular to our martial art,
Mm-hmm.
we call it the family fighting prayer. What it
Okay.
basically states is that I know who I am, for I'm a warrior. I know what I can do, and I know what I can do to my enemies. Therefore, I am at peace, and there is no conflict.
Yes, it is a It is that give and take, right? Is that
Hmm.
radical acceptance and letting go of whatever is going to happen and let it happen.
Yep.
And knowing that whatever default method you go to, we say this a lot, and it's you don't rise to the occasion, you
Yep.
sink to the level of your training.
Hmm.
And for every time that you train at 100%, you're fighting at like 50% in the real world.
Hmm.
There's so many misconceptions that you can just go to a dojo and suddenly you'll be able to win against everybody.
Yeah.
Oh, and their reason, I'm sorry about that. Their reasonings for starting, I tend to find kind of like Tim Larkin said at 70-30,
Hmm.
where he was saying like 70% it's after the fact.
Hmm.
And I mean, gosh, I felt like 90-10, you know. I felt like there were so many women more often than not that came in after something
Yep.
happened.
Yep.
And to develop that warrior mindset is not easy after you have fallen into a hole. You know, you
Hmm.
have to climb out of the hole first.
Yeah.
And that's what we try to do with Krav, and that's what I try to do with my own training and with my online presence is to give that credence to it.
Yep. So in my experience, when I was coaching and teaching, I used to teach a 4-hour workshop at least once a month here in the community. And it was not intended to be like the one and done empowerment shop that trades and technique. What it was
Right.
supposed to be was a point of like, hey, this is a point of inspiration to say, hey, this is a hard lifestyle, and if you're going to do this you have to commit to it daily, and you're not going
Mhm.
to get proficient necessarily one and done because it doesn't work
Right.
that way. Fighting, as simple as it is very hard because you have to dedicate yourself to that lifestyle. And the thing that I found very difficult for me to deal with as a man teaching women personal protection and self-defense is one, it's coming from trauma,
Mhm.
because the majority of the women that I dealt with I had to deal with after an incident occurred, so they
Mhm.
still might actually be in that traumatic response, in that traumatic
Mhm.
window where they may not be present enough mentally and emotionally to take in this data and to put it into action, let alone the triggering
Yeah.
standpoint of having a man standing there in aggressive posture talking about violent things, and then actually having to put hands on in those scenarios. And that is really hard to, like, one, as an instructor, to be present and mindful of,
Mhm.
and two, putting into practice, and also just intellectually of dealing with the empathy, because I can understand it from an intellectual standpoint, but I have
Right.
never been in that circumstance. It is not my scope of reality as a man, or no, me as a man who is biologically not a woman,
Mhm.
having to deal with male violence toward me, a woman, because I'm not a woman and I don't
Right.
have the
Right.
mindset. I don't have that
No.
experience. And so trying to put myself in that mindset and viewpoint was really hard. And I found with some instructors is professionally incorrect, or not incorrect. It's There is a lack of accountability and professionalism there because they're so focused on the empowerment and
Mhm.
selling the system, but not
Mhm.
actually paying attention to the reality here.
Yes, and me and my good friend Megan, which I should link you up with her, an amazing clinical psychologist,
Yeah.
Krav Maga, brown belt. I consider her a black belt. She's incredible. We talk about this accountability and exactly what you said. There is a disconnect between teaching somebody and being a mental health professional. Those are
Yep.
two separate things. And so
Yep.
when you're working in a trauma, like you said, informed environment, you have more education for how to handle that stuff. There should be mental health training with instructors.
Yep.
I think that that is a huge deficit in Krav Maga, that we are literally taking people's personal safety into our hands,
Yep.
and we're not educated on how that's going to translate to their inner world and what they're experiencing on any given day, which, like you said, trauma people, you know, you don't know, they could still be in it and they could be in that trauma for months if not
Mhm.
years. And so there is a huge disconnect there. And I think that I think you hit the nail on the head. There needs to be some sort of integration
Mhm.
that needs to happen, because adopting that warrior mindset is not an overnight process. It isn't. And it's not a one-stop shop. One silver bullet fixes, everything. You have to make fighting your lifestyle.
Yep.
You have to make violence kind of a part of your, experience in a way, because you don't have to be violent to conceptualize violence. You
Nope.
could just go to the grocery store and have a little bit of an imagination and figure out what you might do in different scenarios. But in order to solve the problem, in order to satisfy the answer, you're going to need those tools.
Mhm.
And that only comes with consistency.
Yep. And this is so you touched on that of having the term that I use is having a criminally creative imagination, where you're putting yourself in the mindset of some of the more criminal things that
Mhm.
criminals may do about violence. Because here's the
Yeah.
thing: as law-abiding citizens, we follow the law, and we put our trust and our safety into the system that provides us the execution of the law and the usage of the law. And with
Hmm.
that, the mindset isn't necessarily to take on that accountability. Now, it's a social issue due to modern society, but if the person is not creative enough in understanding how the mindset of a criminal works, how are they
Mm-hmm.
supposed to defend themselves against a criminal? Because the other part about this is criminals think about this stuff all the time,
Hmm.
especially
Hmm.
violent criminals, because they're using it to their advantage. Why not? So
Yeah.
there's that.
Higher level predator
Yeah,
behavior.
yeah.
Absolutely. Sorry, continue.
No, it's fine. Because and the other aspect, so dealing with violence as a human condition. I'm going to be very crass, but the fact is, humanity figured out how to fuck and how to fight a long time ago. What
Yeah.
society's been trying to catch up thereafter is how to deal with those two inherently human things. And one of the problems we run into from a male's perspective is dealing with violence is our currency, therefore it is our wealth and our
Mm.
purpose and our
Your
value is
power.
attached, our power.
Hmm.
And what I'm finding is that in reference to violence as currency, so to speak, and identity,
Hmm.
power comes from restraint, the power
Mm.
to hold back from violent tendencies and violent action,
Hmm.
and having that restraint in dealing with that. Now, it may come
Yeah.
off as like that's very woohoo and everything else, but the fact is, the peaceful warrior is the warrior who has dedicated their life to the assurance of peace, having dealt with the problems of war or violence. So,
Well, and from a woman's perspective, like, it is also a commodity, but I think it exchanges a little bit differently for us, because I mean, I find power in the violence,
mhm,
and but a lot of people don't.
yep,
And a lot of women don't, especially. It's very unnatural. It's not hard for them to restrain themselves. It's hard for them to engage themselves.
mhm,
And so when I think about it, it's like, what do I want to say? It's it's like a mind fuck, right? Because you
yep,
think you're being peaceful and you're avoiding situations that
mhm,
could bring about any sort of violence. But the reality is that you're not in control of who is violent toward you.
that is
And you're
correct.
not in control, and you're not in control of who's going to attack you. So you're living in a la land of disconnect from reality, that violence has been a part of it. Granted, violence has gone down with, civilization, pacification.
Mhm,
So granted, it's gone down, but I mean, it's still very real in our society today. And it's actually, like, to me, it seems like maybe it's not increasing, but the violence is getting worse.
yep,
Like, there at one point was never a mass shooting at an elementary school. At one point, that had never even been heard of. And
yep.
now it's like an every other day occurrence.
Proportionality of the improportionate response to a situation is definitely on the rise, and the thing that I attribute that to is the way that our society has gone toward a very digital space where the the consequences of physical altercation does not
Hmm.
create the person to self-censor and restrain themselves
Hmm.
and not saying the stupid things. So like schoolyard rule sets from where I grew up was, if you're going to say something that's going to cost you to get punched in the face,
Mm,
don't say it. If you're going to
right.
do something that's going to result you getting punched in the face, don't say it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. I think that, and as a woman, it's like we don't think like that. It's not
yeah.
like if I say this, I'm going to get punched in the face. That starts to become the narrative when you're entering like cycles of abuse.
Mhm.
And so the brain starts to switch and everything changes with that. And then you start to act differently.
Yeah, it's really interesting the fact of like I'm approaching 40 and I remember fighting in the schoolyard. I
Hmm.
remember dealing with that as my reality
Hmm.
up until the point that I got into my 20s, when the fact is professionally I couldn't do that anymore, even though I was professionally
Hmm.
in the military. But that response of I'm just going to fight and figure it out, the
Hmm.
reciprocity standpoint, the higher consequences has become more of the reality. And the fact is,
Yes.
just people don't scrap anymore. There's so much things that could be solved just with some physical behavioral modification.
Mm,
But when people don't grow up with this idea of there's consequence, because the
mm,
issue of with I'm not saying there's an issue of free speech. Free speech is a beautiful sense of our liberty of our society. It's
hmm.
fundamental to it. But free
Hmm.
speech does not mean freedom from consequence.
Sure,
And the
sure.
problem that we've ran into is people have misunderstood the fact is that there's consequence for what they say and what they do. And when the consequence comes to such a point where a person has not had those different levels of intensity to
Hmm.
develop a sense of resiliency and
Hmm.
proportionality,
Hmm.
the first time they have to deal with, they choose to utilize violence, they go so improportionate and go to the most extreme versus like, well, you said something, I didn't like it, and I hit you. And now it's turned into you said something online, and now I'm going to shoot up a school. That like there
Right.
is such an
Yeah.
improportionate response to something that could have been figured out if there was some more
Hmm.
resiliency having gone through that process. So,
Right. And even so, as a woman thinking about like that, I have to you walk it back a little bit,
mhm,
because when I think about like self defense for it,
mhm,
I tend to think that accountability looks a little bit different,
yep,
because you know how they say like uh don't teach your boys to rape, like that's all
yeah,
you got to do is just don't teach them to.
yeah,
And you're like, well, no, I mean, I wouldn't be teaching my son that, but if he turned out that way, I would know in my heart that that's not what happened,
yeah,
and it's not my fault. But at the same time, if you're going to push people to a different level, then you messed up 5 steps ago.
yep,
And women need to see that, because all of those steps that led up to, I mean, like you said, a man to a man, it's like you speak ill, you get punched in the face. A woman to a woman, that's not always our first reaction or our first instinct.
mhm,
We want to de escalate the situation and try to, in self defense, we want to de escalate the situation and we want to get out safely, right? Without physical engagement. The moment that it became physical engagement for a woman, I feel like the accountability for that went out the window,
yep,
because not that I do think that we need to be held accountable for our actions, even as women. And we need to see that when we're not being efficient in the day-to-day reality of our situation,
mhm,
then we're at a huge deficit and we're not taking accountability for our actions and we're not
mhm,
taking accountability for ourselves. And guess what? That disrupts freedom,
mhm,
because I should have the freedom not to be attacked. But guess what? I still can't control who's going to attack me. So fuck your freedom. Keyboard warriors is what I call them.
yeah,
Like, not fuck your freedom. Sorry. Like
yeah. But
when
no, I get,
when they say, like, when they think that, like when that happens, when you get attacked, they are like, fuck your freedom.
yep,
They don't
yep,
care. No one cares that way. And life doesn't care. society doesn't really care. You know,
Hmm.
we have built these constructs that have really, you know, put a lot of things in perspective, right? You have systemic racism going on. You have violence against women. You have glass ceiling, marginalization. Like society doesn't give a shit.
Nope.
You know, it's going to do what it's going to do, just like life's going to do what it's going to do. So
Yep.
you got to be prepared for it. I cannot tell women this enough. Like, take accountability for yourself, take accountability for your children, you know, go and learn it the hard way
Hmm.
so that you can protect them and make sure that their life is easier.
Yep. Because your individual liberty and your life and everything that attached to it is based upon you. Nobody
Mhm.
else gives that to you. You have to take accountability and to truly own it. Because at
Mhm.
the end of all things, to sound semi spiritual here, but at the end of all things, when we are held accountable before whomever and whatever, and they ask you what is the summation of your life, they're going to ask, what did you do? And you're going to give this long list of experiences or
Mhm.
excuses. And
Right.
the experiences is what makes us us. So, walking it back a little bit, what are some of those things that a woman needs to be held accountable for her own personal protection and individual liberties when is concerned towards violence?
Yeah. And I think that some of the things that women really need to take into consideration is the is just the awareness of themselves. Like, I don't know how many women go walking in the woods and feel uncomfortable, but just stuff that right down. And instead of being proactive and asking yourself, why do I feel like I'm in danger? And what do I need to look for that might be dangerous? Your body is signaling you, you know, and instead of just going on a walk every single time and being like, well, nothing happened this time and nothing happened this time. So statistically speaking, nothing's likely to happen. You can't, you know, when you're on the other side of the statistic, it doesn't matter. It didn't matter. Statistics do not matter. And so that's where I think that women need to start kind of taking accountability is that you have there's tools out there to literally keep you for real safe,
Hmm.
like for Reezy safe, like bear spray safe, you know, where why would you go into bear country without bear spray? Why would you go into society without the tools that you need to protect yourself?
Part of it
That's
is
what I,
arrogance. Part of that is arrogance. Part of it is ignorance. I mean, it really depends upon the scope of reality and the perception of their reality. Because, I
mhm,
mean, if it, like you said, if it has never happened to me before, then what is the likelihood of it happening to me ever? And
mhm,
that is too much of a gamble that I'm unwilling to let the universe just throw the dice at. Because,
yeah,
again, that puts me in a victim mindset of I'm letting things happen to me and therefore I react. I want to
mhm,
be proactive and act upon because if it is my individual liberties, it has to be me who makes the choice
yeah,
and me who reaps the benefit or the consequences. But that's at least I did something. And
right.
yeah.
No, I totally get what you're saying. Like, everybody needs to be responsible for their own actions. Again, granted, you can't control who attacked you, and it's never your fault. Like, I can't say that enough. It's never your fault because a lot of the women that I talk to really struggle with the shame of what they call losing the battle. You know, I
Mhm.
had to realize for myself that I won because I'm alive today to
Mhm.
say that I won. It didn't matter how I did it. It didn't really matter that I fawned. It worked. You know, it worked in the moment, and that's all you can do. But when I have developed this sense of I would just grit. I don't go into fight, flight, or freeze as easily.
Mhm.
I have a lot more control over my emotions, and I can recognize a little bit better when I'm starting to um, devolve. And
And
I don't
that's
think that, yeah, and I just don't think people have that.
and so martial arts. We have
Mhm,
the external and then we have the internal. And people think
mhm,
the internal is the chi ball,
mhm.
which is not. The internal process is, I would say, more of the mental health, mindfulness, that
Mhm,
individual awareness of self as to what are my limits, what are my boundaries, what are my triggers, and
mhm.
what are my coping skills and responses to all those things. Now, that
Yeah.
sounds very technical and medical when the fact is that they are, but in the regards to combat and self-defense and personal protection, all those things are talking about what can I physically do? Am I aware? Am I aware of myself and how am I being treated? How am I projecting? How do I
Mhm.
respond to all that? It's
Mhm.
just the terminology is different in scope, but that's all the internal work. That's the more important work because the physical stuff you just put in the work in, and by time and experience will carry out. But the boring intellectual side is the one that's often like takes a back seat when is really the most important part is understanding PFIs or pre-fight indicators. You have to understand like what is my potential threat? What is the threat
Mhm.
identification process? Profiling.
Mhm.
What are those things that helps mitigate at distance? Because combat starts at a distance. How do
Mhm.
I acknowledge and accept those things up
Mhm.
until the point where the fight physically happens? Because if the fight physically happens, I've already failed.
Right. And if you're
And
accepting reality, if you're being accepting, you're not going into flight or fight or freeze.
yep,
Because when you accept, you start to perspectivize a little bit more. I
mhm.
got to get you on with Megan because you guys would have a ball doing this.
Oh yeah,
But I love what you said about the mindfulness process, because I wanted to circle into instructors
hmm
not having the same training or even the same awareness that I'm talking about.
yep,
You're getting instructors who know nothing about mindfulness. They don't understand that martial arts is an incredibly like present experience because you can't really think about anything else when you're getting punched in the face. It's very difficult.
nope, nope,
Ask me how I know.
yeah.
And oh gosh, where was I going with that? I'm sorry.
Talk about mindfulness, internal arts.
Yeah, and it all is together. It's all integrating together, but there's too many instructors who are not on the level with how to deal with traumatically affected students in any way. And then they have no training on how to teach somebody how to cope with those skills, how to be mindful of those issues, and then give them coping skills other than your cathartic release of punching people in the face.
you know,
So there's a limit, there's a line that we can only get so far into the physical sense, into helping them break through that barrier of spirituality and realize that they are empowered, that they are strong, and that they are these, beautiful autonomous individuals, who are taking power of themselves. So life is living through them and not
mhm.
to them, like you were saying earlier.
What's interesting in that regard, so for one, for the purely physical standpoint, there's a time where the instructor that their primary scope of reality is producing semi-combat effectiveness immediately. So
Mm,
in the case of like
mm,
a combatives instructor per paramilitary military instruction, like dealing with Krav Maga,
mhm,
or in my case with modern army combatives, because when I was in the
mhm,
army, one of my primary jobs was to teach combatives to my soldiers. And I wasn't concerned about the emotionality. I was clearly the clinical standpoint of saying, hey, this is combat from a man to man standpoint, as in we're
mhm,
going to do hands on. And this is clearly the techniques that we're going within the strategy and the tactics. No emotion attached to it, it's just clearly factual. And we relied upon the ethos of the community to help develop the rest of the stuff. But that is very tailor specific. Now, the other side of it, the truly warrior side of it, it is interesting the fact that warrior societies that have dedicated their lives toward violence has a spiritual, intellectual, artistic side to counteract and balance that. I mean, with the samurai, you have Bushido. With the Shaolin monks, you have Zen Buddhism. With dealing with the Rajput, you have the tenets of Buddhism as well. I mean, there was some
mhm.
sort, and even to the point of like the Christian knights, they have Christianity. So there is always some sort of like ethos to counteract and balance all of that violence, to give them the moral reasons as to why. Now, in a
Yeah.
modern sense, because we're not so focused, I mean, some populations, but us as modern middle class Americans, what is
Mhm.
our ethos that keeps us within the reasons why we do what we do?
Ugh, well, I think that that reasoning has been shooketh for a long time in
Mhm.
America, unfortunately. Um, but For me, because the kind of arts that you listed are very peaceful
Hmm.
arts that kind of, envelop violence in a peaceful way. Like Krav Maga is hyper aggressive,
Yep.
and we're always in. Like, I have had fighters bring me on just purely because of my aggressivity,
Hmm.
and we don't find a lot of peace in the juju of it all, which is kind of what traditional martial arts leans toward. They're very artsy,
Hmm.
and we're a little bit more heavy on the martial, light on the art
Hmm.
part. But I do think that I still think that it engulfs what you're saying. I still am a more peaceful person, and I still have a more grounded perspective than I ever did before I started fighting.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know why that is. I don't know at what point it broke through that barrier, and I don't know what guided me to that. But I think as instructors, it's important to reflect on yourself and how you got to the position that you're in, and really know where your scope is limited, and know where you have your strengths and where you can speak, to what you can speak to. The thing that I don't like is when instructors speak to things that they have no idea about. And I think that that is what really turns women off to martial arts,
Yep.
is when we're sitting there being like, yeah, okay, we're hearing somebody tell us we can't defend ourselves because we're women, which, I mean, God, we'd all be dead then, because none of us can survive a violent encounter, apparently, like we outsmart, out punch them even. So there's a lot that goes into a lot of dynamics that go into self-defense for sure. But the most important one, I think, is the spiritual growth. The physical part of self-defense or fighting is like, it's the 80-20. It's the 20%. The
Hmm.
80% and I don't know why, connecting with violence or connecting with your, you know, prehistoric self, your animal self, really gives you this sense of peace. It's cathartic.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Totally
And
agree. I appreciate Krav Maga. So I have a background in Krav Maga from when I first started in the Army. And then when I was training up here in Alaska, my former business partner was a Krav Maga instructor. So I spent a lot of
mm,
time with that. So I appreciate Krav Maga for what it does as a current and relevant military combatives approach.
mhm,
Because the purpose and intent is so focused as to the immediacy of violence and its efficacy. And that
mhm,
part, because it's so focused, makes it very nuanced. And
mm,
I appreciate that standpoint. The thing
mhm,
that I run into is like how Krav Maga in America has been kind of like, I hate to say watered down, as many other things have been watered down, to include my primary background of the Filipino martial arts has been commercialized. So there's that. And it's interesting to find the people who still stay true to the original purpose behind the thing that they do. Now, that community is really, really small because you're dealing with the top, the apex, and the 1% of all of it that are actually going to stay there. But that's the thing about coaches and lifelong martial arts. They're the ones who stuck with it
yeah, they're the
comparatively to
ones.
everybody else. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, they're the ones who, like you said, they just showed consistency and they never stopped. One thing that I could get into and talk about for years is just how commercialized Krav Maga became, but also how like branded it became in a way.
Yep.
And so people started like doing this CrossFit kind of thing where they would go for a weekend seminar and all of a sudden become an instructor. And it's just an insult. It's just an
Hmm.
insult to the people. You could never do that in jujitsu. If you
Nope.
walked into a thing, you were like, I'm a black belt, they'd be like, okay, okay.
Let's
Like,
test you. Let's get on the mat.
yeah, yeah. And in Krav, it's like, well, it's there's such a fad in a way, and it because it presents so aggressively, it
Hmm.
can seem you can empower people on a very superficial level with just one seminar, right? But it's when you have that deep connection to what the art is and what the process is, and embracing that process, not just thinking, oh, I'm here to just defend myself, like very broad,
Hmm.
what does that mean to you?
The
Does
thing
that
that,
mean,
oh,
yeah, go ahead. No.
no, you go ahead. You're on a good point.
Um, so what does that mean to you? Does that mean that you're able to protect your children?
Hmm.
Does that mean that you can go for a walk in the woods safely? Does that mean you want to go for a jog safely? Like, what does safety mean to you? Safety to me means stability, and security, being able to walk anywhere in peace. So you have to define that stuff for yourself.
Yep. And the thing that I found very beautiful about the history of Krav Maga, because it is the embodiment of the spirit of the Israeli people. And
Mm-hmm.
the way that it was taught to me is the very basis of the ethos is never again.
Mm.
Never again will they be subjected to the wills of others. Never again will they deal with the aspect of genocide. Never
Yeah.
again will they be victimized. Now that mindset of never again is the thing that I find after the fact when it comes to people who approach personal protection and self defense after the fact of an incident occurring to them or somebody within their scope. And again, it creates that space for them to take accountability
Hmm.
and a point of inspiration. Now, when they stay, never again is a good place to start with a why, but there we have to grow out from that. But we can still stay true to that core of never again.
Yeah, yeah. So what I feel like you're saying is something that I like to do, which is like a mantra.
Hmm.
And that's where my grounding is for like those decisions. So when a mantra that I had a couple years ago was, you'll probably appreciate this, maybe like surrender the outcome, rigorous authenticity, do the hard work.
Yep.
And whenever I was going into anything, if I was like rigorous authenticity, do the hard work, and that was my mantra. Another mantra that was really good is I belong here.
Hmm.
This is where you belong and this is where you're supposed to be at this given moment, and to give your heart to it, just give it up and, do the hard work for fuck. Like get in there and just know that, you know, the more you practice, the better you're going to be.
Hmm.
And this is why I think, sorry, circling back to instructors, this is why I think instructors who only do a weekend seminar just have a huge disconnect, is because they don't have the time. They don't
Hmm.
have the time. They don't have the hard work. They don't have any of that on their back saying, this is what I've done. They went to a weekend seminar and now they're just trying to navigate through a couple people. And I think it's really dangerous.
Yeah.
I think it's negligent and careless and dangerous. And I don't think that it's something that martial arts or civilians should stand for.
Agreed, because the accountability. So the interesting thing within the Filipino martial arts community is this issue about accountability of what we teach. Because let's face it, we're dealing with knives, sticks, stabbing the crap out of people. And
Mm-hmm,
so the presentation is very important and the perception of it is very important. And often
mm-hmm,
enough, we get people who get in trouble because they teach some very effective knife work that is in perception murder because that's the mentality that people see it.
mm.
And where it becomes professionally negligent in my mind is like, how do you present this stuff? What is your accountability? What is your context of explanation? And on top of all that, you, the instructor, the ethos as to why you do it. And
Yes.
what is your
Yeah.
end all goal behind it? Again, going back to the why.
Yeah, and if you're going to step up to other people and teach them and guide them,
Hmm.
then you better know really well what that process even looks like. You
Hmm.
better be educated, like you said. A big majority of it is not only spiritual, but it's educational, it's intellectual, it's strategizing. It is, putting in the brain work to change your brain in such a way that your temporal horizon switches from living toward a future rather than from your trauma.
Yep.
And in order to flip that, it takes a lot of nurturing, which isn't super inherent in men,
Hmm.
and guidance and gentleness at times. And when, like you said earlier, when men kind of come in, it's all about that, like, get in there, get it done. The moment that you get it done, it's going to be over. You're going to know that you went through it. And it's like, I see that, but where does that, how, next, like, follow up, please, give me a follow up. What comes after that? What comes after when I do the hard work? and now I'm a proficient artist, but I have no perspective. So I'm going to walk out into the street and I'm going to be just as ill-equipped as I always was.
Yep. And that's that generational trauma aspect of men not having the skill sets or the permission to learn these things, because
Mm.
men
Mhm.
think about this stuff anyways. We just do. We've just been conditioned by each generation. Now we've gotten better. 20 years of war has really made us to force us to get better at this. But men have thought about this as men have, because the very nurturing fact of the traditions of warfare and combat from the tribal standpoint was men of the tribe training in the village, and the boys watched and eventually participated. And that is a
Mhm.
very beautiful thing of teaching some family traditional ethos, skills,
Mhm.
bonding.
Mhm.
And that's where it can be beautiful. Where it is a problem is when there isn't that and the nurturing aspect of, yes, this is what we do. What is the reason why we do this? Because the thing that I'm fighting
Yeah.
now, after shutting my gym down, is I started in the backyard with men of my tribe, so to speak, and now
Mhm.
I'm back in the backyard with men of my tribe, to include my son, and
Huh.
nurturing that process through of saying, hey, this is what we're doing. There's a reason why, but making sure that we're not so fixated on the bravado and the violent conditioning as to this is who we are, therefore this is
Mhm.
what we do. It's like,
Mhm.
well, we can be so much more than just our violent potential. We can be artists. We can
Mhm.
be we can be men of empathy, compassion, and love. Because the fact is, the reason why we do these things is not because this is our value and our identity. It's
Mhm.
because of love.
Yeah.
Re- the reasons why we fight is because we want to protect and defend that of which we love and those whom we love. And we are willing to sacrifice our sense of safety, self, and everything to protect that of which we love. And that part is, I some men don't have the mindfulness because they're not there yet because they haven't
Yeah.
been taught that. So,
Well, that like with with women, it's it's like we're the opposite because we never engage in aggression. You
mhm,
know, it's really kind of rare to get girls in the gym and say like you're gonna practice and sharpen this knife. You know,
mhm,
because like to your point, at the same time as, little boy warriors going on, you have the little girl learning how to do the stuff that the girls had to do. And there was this
yep,
huge separation between the two. And so our natural just inclination is be quiet, be seen, not heard, like, be pretty, be unviolent, don't be violent. In fact, it's like the last thing that we ever want to engage in. But why we do it is for the same reasons, is for, I think that if you find the love in there, then you'll see that it is actually a choice that is honoring yourself versus, fueling a fire that really is not catching or starting in the first place. You know what I mean?
yep. There has been so many beautiful, painful, but beautiful in the aspect of accounts of mothers protecting their children
Mhm.
against men of their circle, often men that they
Mm.
are attached to. I mean, the number of women that I've been involved in instruction with after the fact, that the reason why they came to me is the fact that they had to deal with domestic violence. They
Mhm.
had to deal with the aspect of they have to they are the last line and the first line of defense between the violence of their male counterparts
Mhm.
for them and to their children. And there's been
Yeah.
so many harrowing stories and experiences about women who stand the line, because the fact is women do, they just do. Okay, women on the frontier picked up a shotgun and protected the homestead, they just do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And
When things like when things come to knock at the door of life, I do think that we have an advantage as women because we're not at brute strength, like we're not on your level,
yep,
it's in a lot of ways. And so when you do see like a woman who is able to protect herself in such a powerful way, we congratulate it. What about a man? Like it's so esoteric that you guys or sorry, ubiquitous that you guys are fighting, you're looking for that power. You guys have always been ingrained to go protect. And
Hmm.
what does that look like? Women, when the protection comes out, it shouldn't be in the situation.
Yep.
It shouldn't be as the situation is happening. It should have been 5 steps before,
Hmm.
when you were able to recognize when things started to actually take a turn for the worst, you know?
Yeah, some of the mindsets, and I've been subject and I'm working of this mindset, is the fact that if my wife has to fight, I've already failed.
Mm,
Now,
mm,
there, depending upon the way you look at that,
mhm.
it's like, well, it is my job to protect my wife. Yes and
Yeah.
no, because she's accountable for her own safety as well.
Mhm.
Because if she's to
Yeah.
be a free and liberty-minded human being, she does not need my protection. So there's
Right.
that aspect. Now, but
Yes.
the other aspect, because I love my wife of nearly 20 years, w- I have that attachment that because
Yeah.
I have the skill sets and experience, I want to do that of her. Now, the flip side of that, my wife has the same viewpoint of I want to protect my husband. Now, it's
Yeah.
different in the way she protects me, is not necessarily in the physical standpoint, but in the social and the recovery standpoint, dealing with all
Mm.
those things that are my internal enemies, not my physical enemies, and maybe some of the social enemies, but not the physical aspect. So going back to the fact of if my wife has to fight, I failed as a husband is incomplete. So
Yeah. I think that the only issue that I can see is that that is nice, but it's also like, if you don't equip her, I'd be like, when my girl fights, you better watch out. Like, she
yep.
coming for you. I'm gonna try to keep her away from you so that you're safe, because she's gonna kill you.
Yep.
Like, you want her to rise up as the woman and say, like, I protected my family. I was right there standing next to you, making sure that you were supported and that I was had your back. You know what I mean? But I
Yep.
do think that there is something to say about having this idea that the man goes first,
Hmm.
that the man is there to protect. What
Hmm.
if it was a woman who broke in?
Yeah.
Is like, would that be more acceptable if I went after her, than it would be if you did? It's kind of one of those things where it's the different morals, I
Hmm.
guess, and values between men and women that cross the lines of self-defense are difficult to kind of weed through, I guess, because there is a time where, yes, you go, yes, you stay, yes, you let them go, yes, you let them stay. Like, you have to have that worked out beforehand. I don't know if you talk to your wife about, okay, well, what if we're here, and are you going to go low, or am I going to go low? Are you going to go high? Like, who's
Hmm.
going where, so we don't run each other over, or are you turning and getting the kids and getting out? Like, what's
Yep.
the safety plan? Always have a safety plan.
Yep.
Especially for my ladies, like, when you don't have a safety plan in place, you're doing yourself a huge disservice, because you're still not thinking in the sense of, what if something did happen,
Hmm.
and how do I stop bad things from happening? That's all self-defense is like, you're kind of like baby proofing your world.
You have a plan. You have a plan.
Yeah. Yes, and that's the only way to live, is to have a purpose,
Hmm.
like you said, and to take that purpose and make a plan out of it and enjoy the process.
Indeed, and putting in the work, because it's one thing to theorize it as an intellectual uh,
Mhm.
exercise. It's another thing to put it into practice. Because we did fire drills as children.
Yeah.
Why not react to contact drills? So, like one that I particularly enjoy is a reaction to contact, where my job is to act as the barriers and screen the
Mhm.
escape and evasion for my wife and my children. Because her job is to
Yeah.
get the kids out of there and into the vehicle while I create time and space. Because talk about
Yeah.
a fighting principle here is time equals distance. We
Mhm.
need more space to manipulate whatever we're going
Right.
to do and to create
Yeah.
options. So by doing so, giving my wife and my children options, I have to screen and I have to sacrifice. So that, but that's not just intrinsically unique to men. This is just good fighting principles, anyways.
Mhm.
Let's talk about react to contact drills from the army. Okay, you initiate contact based upon forward contact, and then you allow your as a base element, and you allow your flanking element to screen to deal with the situation from the flank.
So
It's again,
are you talking about like a distraction? Sorry, you cut out there for a second.
yeah, I'm talking about like a distraction where like I physically screen, and my wife is able to
Yeah.
E&E
Yeah.
out with the kids in the vehicle. Or that applies to like modern concepts or just warfare is reaction to contact drills, battle drill number one from the infantry manual of take contact front as a base and then flank and maneuver on the outside. It's the same principle of you
Yeah.
have a base to operate from and everybody escapes out or engages from the flank. So,
Yeah, and I love all those tactics and like it's all like all the calculations, like those
mhm,
have to all of that has to be present. You have to know like time and space.
mhm,
You have to know force. You have to know mass and acceleration. You have to know where
mhm.
it's all coming from. When when the police are minutes and you have seconds, um, that's not the time to be wishing you had it.
Yep. Yep.
I'd rather have it than not need it and need it than not have it. And for my ladies there, you can expect that the moment that you are dead, your children are too.
That is correct. Yep.
So just keep that in mind that when you're thinking to yourself, well, I'm in Happy Valley heaven over here, and this is not going to happen to me. Think about your kids and think about what might happen to you if you're gone, or to them if you're gone in
Mhm.
any sort of issue. You know, your children need that. Your children need you. You
They
need
do.
you.
Yes. Everybody is important. And that sounds very woohoo, but the fact is, everybody is important. They're important to somebody, if not themselves.
Yeah.
So,
Why do
because,
we do what we do? Like,
yeah,
because these somebodies that we don't even know, we want them to educate themselves so that they can not only feel the way we feel, but also have it's a reality check. Like, you can feel as safe as you want to feel. I'm sure you practice handguns.
oh, I live in Alaska. I'll just put it that
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. And I tell my students that, I'm training a different thing. I'm training a different part. I agree that people should carry, everyone should have their liberty to carry and do what they're going to do. But I do think that as a woman, you need to understand that you're bringing a weapon into the fight
Hmm.
100% of the time.
Hmm.
And that if you don't know hand to hand combat or how to retain that weapon, then it's going to be used against you.
Which I'm very grateful that you brought up that point because a constant debate is women's self defense and personal protection. The strategies and priority up front. Is it the
Mm.
physical side or is it tool oriented? And I didn't want to come up with my own because I already have my answer to that. But I'm very grateful that you brought up the answer that I was leaning toward, anyways, because, yeah, I don't want to be a man telling women how to defend themselves.
Well, and I think that there's such an important role that men play in self defense. But I also
Hmm.
think that as women, we should be right there on the forefront too, to take up, to teach and train half of the human population that's out there, when we have so many men coming into such a delicate place and a vulnerable place, especially for women, like you said earlier, empathy, spirituality, the warrior mindset, but also
Hmm.
like making sure that you're trained, trained in trauma responses and everything.
Yep, because I mean the physical considerations alone, from a man teaching a woman how to defend themselves physically and with a weapon. Okay,
Hmm.
there's just
Hmm.
some physical considerations that men just don't understand because we're
Right.
not built that way. So when it comes to a woman defending herself with a weapon, what do you
Mm.
think are some of those? What is the hierarchy of tool usage for a woman, particular for the perspective of personal protection and self defense?
I think it just differs a tiny bit in the sense that we get away with a little bit more,
Yes,
just
yes,
speaking candidly.
yep,
If we're assaulted, then, and we kill the assailant, it's a little bit more acceptable than if a man to a man, right? So my hierarchy goes pretty quickly
hmm,
as my conditions change. The moment that, it's space and time, it's awareness. It starts with awareness. right?
Yes.
When you're not aware, then the next part is like you're kind of just it's that condition orange, right? You know something's wrong. Maybe you're not acting on it yet, but you know something's wrong. At that moment is when I am preparing. I'm
Hmm.
not waiting till condition red or condition black to make myself ready. I will be ready to pull my sidearm at that point if I
Hmm.
need to, or create the distance that I need
Hmm.
to make sure that I can pull that firearm. You know, you have to be tactical and you have to be calculated. And when you're standing even in a room of people, you don't know who's getting too close to you for what reason. You know
Yep.
what I mean? Because if someone is getting close to you, maybe it is to grab your weapon.
That
We
is
just
correct.
don't we just don't know intention, right? We just don't know people's intentions. And so we have to prepare for all intentions.
Because the enemy has a say in combat, just does. And
Unfortunately, they do. They do.
yeah,
Higher level predators, and like Tim said, like you have to delve deep into the mindset of the the murderous and the worst type of people in order to understand them effectively to defend yourself against them. It's just it's wild. You know, you don't learn peace by avoiding conflict.
no, you don't. As much as we would like to, we don't.
No.
So going back to the tool specific, just to talk about hierarchy and priority, because I'll rapid fire some stuff here. Tool priority and preference. Firearms, number one. Would you agree? What are your thoughts on edged weapons for women's use?
Um, Again, know that you're bringing a weapon into the fight 100% of the time. Um, and know that you are at an inherent disadvantage, even
Hmm.
with that weapon close to you, unless it's drawn and up. I, you know what I mean? Like it is as
Yep.
good to me as it is pointed at the person that's trying to assault me.
Okay.
So if as long as that's there, then that's my thing. But you are your first line of defense. You said it yourself. So my first line of defense is hands,
Hmm.
hands, always hands, de-escalation. You know, we don't look people at people's eyes like we tend to think. We look at people's hands. All
Yep.
right, the first thing that we tend to see. And so using your hands to de-escalate or to even get that first shot off
Hmm.
so that you can create distance or you can get out or you can draw your weapon, like you have to know that stuff. And you also have to understand the space and time stuff, like you said, and you also have to understand the hierarchy, which for me is personally hands
Yep.
first.
Hands are closer, and I mean, action is faster than reaction. So
Hmm.
there's that. Okay, another tool. Impact weapons, say like tactical flashlight. What do you think?
I mean, I would suggest, why are you carrying it? Are you out and about? Like, yeah, then I think that you should carry things that make you feel safe.
Yeah.
But you should have them utilizable. You should have them utilizable at the given time that you're not feeling safe, not
Hmm.
tucked away in your pocket.
No.
Um,
Okay.
Knives, like you asked earlier, I think are um it's dangerous. It's an edged weapon, and most of the time when you're stabbing, you're gonna cut yourself too.
Hmm.
So you have to be aware that with a knife, you're probably getting stabbed. And so bringing a knife into the fight is always problematic for me
Hmm.
because I still trust women with the tools that I give them to be able to avoid the conflict so effectively that they never have to result to, should I bring the gun? Should I bring the knife? Should I bring what weapon
Yep.
should I bring? Should I bring the pepper spray? You know, if you're going out at night, bring a flashlight. If you're going out
Mhm.
into the woods, like know the advantages and the disadvantages. You know what I mean? And I
My
think that no, go ahead.
no, I agree with your line of thought. My only point with like impact tools like flashlights is if you could beat them with a flashlight, that means you could beat them with your hands because it
Oh,
just
and I
adds
totally
impact.
agree.
Because if you
Yes,
can't
that
fight with your hands, you can't fight with a flashlight.
yeah, improvised weapons, like
Mm.
using your environment, all that stuff, like using a stick. I it's not that I tell people don't grab anything. Your hands are going to be your first thing ever. Your first line of defense to me is going to be contextual. It's
Hmm.
whatever the immediate danger is. First thing we take care of is the immediate danger. Second principle we have is simultaneous or as close to simultaneous counter strike. because it doesn't matter what you hit them with. It matters that you hit them.
Yep.
And it matters that you hit them a lot. And with a weapon, especially a knife, most of the time, all I have to do is punch them in the face. And it's hard to stab somebody while they're just fucking raging on your face, punching you in the face.
Yep.
So with that being said, for women, if you have a knife and you're expecting to get punched in the face from a violent assault, you're probably, like you said, not even able to utilize that weapon. You need to go to back to the principle of what is the immediate danger? How do I defend that? What is my simultaneous counterstrike? How do I reset that loop? You know, how do I get them thinking about something other than the action that they're engaged in, which is attacking you?
Yep, because cognitive disruption, to use a technical term, cognitive disruption is a phenomenal break in tempo. Because when you have that, when you impact somebody in the face repeatedly, they're not thinking. They're thinking about that immediate danger, as you're saying. And a lot of people, especially within the knife community, they rely so much on the flashy knife disarms through manipulation or destruction. But there's the other aspect. You can just knock a dude out or knock a person out. And then in regards to like the size mass displacement issues from men to women, you're dealing with 200-pound man versus 110-pound woman. 200-pound man knocks woman in the face. She's not going to be, I hate to say it, but the likelihood, even from a 200-pound man squaring off against a 140-pound man, getting punched in the face, the reality of them being able to actuate this tool is going to be very difficult because of the
And so
cognitive
we're
disruption.
talking close. We're talking about close space, which is also the only way knife is effective.
Yep.
So you have two opposing problems here. Either your knife is drawn and you're actively using it in the space that you have, which is none, or you're not having it drawn to show somebody, or you're brandishing. I don't get brandishing, but you're brandishing it to try to scare somebody away or whatever you may be doing with that. And so you have these hierarchies of when and where and how and why you should pull the weapon. For everything that I have to think about for every consideration that I have to make for that weapon, I'm slowing myself down by 50 freaking percent. And I also am like taking up my whatever left cognitive ability that I have, focusing on one tool. When I have tons of tools in my tool belt that I could use instead of just the most obvious one.
Yep. Again, fighting is simple. Okay.
Punch them a lot, punch them in the face, grab a brick, smash them in their head, go
because
home.
violence is simple, but being creatively violent and crossing that line is not easy. So
that's where art comes in. Like you said, that's where the art comes in. That's where the spirituality comes in. That's where, like taking it and using it as a way of life versus and a warrior way of life, realizing that it is directly attached to a warrior way of life. And it's too bad that higher level predators we find sometimes in our wake. But this is one of those things that they're no longer higher level predators to me.
Yep. Agreed.
Because I'm just as high a level predator, but I use my intentions for good, you know?
It's the argument between the sheepdog and the wolf. So
yeah, exactly. Do you become the wolf? Like, how do you know?
So
I mean, even
go
ahead. No,
I was just saying
please.
one last bit about the knife. This often gets me in trouble in my Filipino martial arts community, but the very basic principle: if I can touch you, I can cut you, and I can kill you. However, you can do the same to me.
Yes.
Because the community gets so fixated on the tool when the fact is the tool is not magic. You have to be able to fight, and the tool isn't going to do the fight for you.
Exactly. So, every tool is a secondary. Every tool, every like external, like extra force multiplier, right? And you got to think that like no one goes to a fight to get their ass kicked, right? So you either have a gun, stick, knife, 3 friends, anything not to get your ass kicked. So you always assume that there's a weapon, but to be the person to bring a weapon, you can't help it. You're going to fixate on it, because what if they take it? Now you're in a lot of trouble, even though disarming a knife is incredibly difficult.
Yep. That falls. So my categories of F's. You got fight, flight, freeze. Okay.
Mhm.
I use failure beyond your control, and then you're just fucked because
Yeah.
you got a meteor coming, you stepped across the road, you got ran over, you kick in a door, and there's a dude with a dishka behind uh, a fortified position. Regardless of how skillful you are, the universe and the enemy has a say in this. And this is where like this idea about fighting fair, this is no one gets me in trouble. Fighting fair is a fallacy. Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say that is more applicable from a woman's perspective dealing with male violence toward them?
Oh, yeah, because whenever I'm fighting, even if I'm sparring,
Hmm.
I am practicing self-defense.
Hmm.
Whereas a man is not, can generally fluidly transition between the two. Either they're being attacked for their training or they're doing the attacking. Women, even if I'm attacking a man for the technique of the sake of the technique, it's
Hmm.
not as impactful. It's still not as impactful as it would be if, a 200 something pound man were to do it. So we're still, our what you're experiencing with us trying to choke you is different, and what we're experiencing trying to spar you or to protect ourselves against you is completely different, you
Hmm.
know? So I totally agree.
Well, it's the simple reason why in combat sports we have weight classes. So the problem I've ran into being a Filipino man is I am a foot shorter than every man possible. So all my fighters have been over a foot to 2 feet taller than me. Now, what I deal with is I'm also like very stout, so I sit comfortably at like 250 pounds and 5 foot six.
Okay.
So I'm dense. The problem I still run into is a size mass issue because some of my fighters, to include one of my pro fighters, was a gentleman who is 6'3" and like 300 pounds.
Hmm.
And no matter what, if he sits on me, I'm screwed. Even fight strength, size, capability. There's a size mass issue. So it's not just, I mean, you can't fight physics, not easily at least.
No, and you can't fight, like you said, the universe. Even Navy SEALs
Mhm.
come home in body bags.
Yep. So,
It's not going to be a fair fight, and it's not a fair fight.
yep.
Um, and uh, oh my gosh, I just lost my train of thought again. I'm so sorry. Why did I do
It's
that?
okay. Well, let's switch gears a little bit back to, let's
Yeah.
circle back to the beginning. What is your
Yeah.
reason why? What is the reason why you fight the way and do the things that you do? Because actually, even further back, what are the things that you do? Because not everybody got privy to your bio, but let's
Yeah.
on record. What do you do, and what is the reason why you do what you do?
Okay. So I am a certified practical instructor from the Wingate. So that's just the technical term. What I do is teach men and women, I teach them all how to take life and turn it so that you can live without something holding you back,
Mhm.
and thinking about safety as a fundamental in your hierarchy of needs. Like, that's what I do, is I identify that, you know, and we work on what is safe for you and what that means for you. Now, my why is it's complex, it's dynamic. I didn't come from a very good upbringing. I am the way that I am because I didn't come from a good upbringing,
Mhm.
and I had to fight a lot to be seen and heard, and I had to fight to live, and truly it was a battle. Life was a huge battle for me, into my childhood. And then from there, stemming into abusive relationships, obviously. And it just, it was just a cycle, And so once I started Krav, I started to try to break the cycle. And
Yep.
I had to figure that there's a common denominator, even if it's not my fault,
Yep.
you know? And so the accountability part is really important for women, I think, to say that you're not at fault, but you are accountable. And it's, time to take that back, which is what I want to instill in women. And why I do it is to empower, is to give that power back to us, and so we can step out of the marginalization. and
Hmm.
we can be a force. I think one of the reasons we're not so much of a force is because there's not a ton of us in there. If we had a million ants in there, then we all would know what to do. You know what I mean? We'd be a
Hmm.
force. So that's why I do it. I do it for them.
It, I agree. And that's beautiful and unique. And I appreciate you sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Because the thing with men, okay, men in martial arts, they do it because it's what we do. What I
Hmm.
find with women in martial arts and personal protection is that they have to, because it's an imperative. So, like, comparatively to my children, I have a daughter that's 11 and I have a son that's 9. My
Okay.
son that is 9, we do it because we're having fun as we're playing, it's male bonding, it's still fun. I teach my daughter, on the other hand, because I have to, because there's
Mm.
considerations that I have to be accountable for of because I have knowledge and experience, I should share that with my daughter.
Well, don't you feel
And
that way with your son?
absolutely, absolutely. But the
Because
perspective, the mindset that I have at current with them because of their age, because I still want my son to be able to play and be a child, because I don't want to remove the window of innocence from him. My daughter, on the other hand, she's 11. She's dealing as things that she has to deal with as an 11-year-old young girl.
right,
And she's
right.
more aware of the world and things around her, and considerations are more important, are more apparent to her. So that window of innocence has kind of like gotten much smaller. So this is
You
where my
know,
mindset is slightly different with the two of them.
right, yeah, and I have 2, one is 16 and the other one is almost 6.
Hmm.
So, I get the difference between, like, that huge age gap where I do have my daughter train with me. I
Hmm.
don't force her to train, um, but I do kinda require it at times, where I'm like, "You need to get in and train, you're going in to do this or that or whatever." But, of course, children don't wanna do what you do,
Yeah.
like, at least my kids don't. But I totally see what you're saying, 'cause if I think about how I raise my son, I don't let him really watch violent movies or play violent video games.
Hmm.
He's already violent enough. He just doesn't make a lot of impact.
Yeah.
But toddlers are super violent. They're insane. So, so I see the contrast and I see the dynamic and I see that your goal has to be different for
Hmm.
both. And it's just taking that for me anyway, it's taking that awareness and knowing that, like, one day my son is gonna break innocence, and
Hmm.
that innocence is it's not something that just people often think that it's, like, something that needs to be replaced by experience,
Yeah.
and, like, they're innocent, and then they learn, and then they're no longer the innocent, and so but it's not like you are doing a huge favor for your daughter in this way because you're not teaching her that it is a consequence of an experience.
Mhm.
Innocence is keeping yourself safe and knowing the world, and it's just objectively, right? It's
Mhm.
an objective truth. There's no reason to shy away from it. And I think that teaching not only our daughters to defend ourselves, but also our boys to defend themselves,
Mhm.
and they'll start to uh, relate, then there will be relatability between the two. And
Yep.
once you have a connection, you can create the continuity to
Yep.
change the narrative.
And I mean, it is the basis of equality because violence is equal to no, it is equal across board. It does not care about gender.
Nope.
And with that, it is also a human experience that is shared universally. So it's not just specific to one side of the population or the other. Now, the other
Right.
part that I'm running with my son is parenting the inner child and talking about this issue about identity, evaluation, currency as a man. The
Mm,
way that I grew up being adopted into a military martial arts family is I was trained to be a warrior because this is what we do. My adoptive family has warfare all the way back to the French and Indian War. So we
mm,
have been touched by that, and there's
yeah.
generations of trauma to work through. So as a young child and into a young man, this is what I was conditioned to do. I was conditioned to go to war,
Yeah.
and my valuation and purpose was attached to that. And a lot of the nurturing was put to the back seat. So
Yeah.
as an adult, as a father now of a son and a daughter, I in the process of my recovery is also parenting that inner child of saying, hey, being mindful of allowing that inner child to say, you're allowed to be a child. You're allowed to be vulnerable. You're allowed to like art. You're allowed to love
Yeah.
things. And it's not just so fixated that you must be a warrior. You can be a
Yeah.
warrior and you can be other things. So,
Same with women. Like when you're guiding your inner child to the next part of the trauma and you're guiding that out, you have to have a certain type of push.
mhm,
You have to have a certain type of grit and a certain type of stick to itiveness to literally take the inner child that is. So if I was to take like my say when I had a lot of trauma when I was like 16 or 17, my sister died.
mhm,
There was a lot of trauma there. And and like quite unintuitively, training self-defense helped all of that trauma because I could guide my inner child to the next part of my life and
mhm,
our life together. But I had to tell myself, like, sometimes I had to give myself tough love. And
yep,
sometimes I had to be aggressive. And sometimes I had to say, like, you're going to shut up and you're going to just do the hard work,
mhm,
and I had to push myself. Sometimes I had to force myself to do things that I did not want to do. And I think that that's what self-defense gives you. It's not that I want to fight, you know, like you say, like you were raised this way. I was bred this way.
mhm,
I'm a product of the streets. So and each person is going to be a little bit different, but you have to have the nurture. But you also have to balance that. You have to be willing to access your violence,
mhm.
because if you don't, you're not one with your mind and body. You are disresonant with who we are as human beings and who you are as a powerful individual.
Yep, I totally agree. And it's that hard part of, again, going back to dealing with reasons why and looking at some more of the criminally creative mindsets and
Mm,
understanding what we're dealing with is to face the darkness. We're going to be touched by it just a little bit, if not a lot. And having
yeah.
that mindfulness and that resiliency and the skill sets to cope with all that and manage, that's the internal art. That's the hard part. That's the stuff that doesn't look sexy on a highlight reel for marketing. But
Mm,
that's the most important part because it deals with this issue about how do we carry trauma as people and more importantly as instructors. So I want to segue into a point that I ask every instructor, every coach, is this
okay.
issue about vicarious traumatization and compassion fatigue,
Okay.
because anybody who is taught, regardless of what it is, gets burnt out.
Hmm.
And what have you had this experience? And if so, would you like to go into it? And more importantly, how have you found yourself moving past that?
Yeah. I don't understand the first one, the vicarious trauma.
Vicarious traumatization. When you get
Okay.
it, I simply put it as the weight of knowledge of people's circumstances. When you get involved with people, you get to know
Hmm.
them, you get to know
Mm,
what's going on with them, you get to know their
okay.
truths. So, for context, for me, when I was coaching and teaching, I had a lot of clients and youth clients that were brought to me by way of the behavioral health community and child protective services.
Okay.
Knowing the circumstance of their
Mm,
case files and
mhm,
participant of it, that
mhm,
weighed upon me. And
mm,
just the same as being participant and viewing the case files with a lot of the battered women that I've had to deal with over the years, that knowledge weighs heavily on a person.
yeah.
And as a result of it, that chips away at my internal capability of dealing with trauma
Mhm,
and my window of tolerance. And so
mm,
with that, my window of tolerance got so full that I had no emotional capacity to deal. And as a
yeah.
result of it, it spilled over. So with
Mhm.
that explanation, is that something that you're familiar with?
Oh, yeah. So there is this concept called emotional crossover and
Hmm.
emotional spillover.
Hmm.
And I think that if I'm understanding correctly, tell me if I'm incorrect. You're talking about like somebody's experience actually emotionally affecting and weighing on you in a like in a
Yep.
long-term way, in a way that
That is
it
correct.
shouldn't be.
Yep.
Okay. Absolutely. Because if I can't, it hurts if I can't help.
Hmm.
Right. And so in order to, I'm a very like loving person and relatable person, and I just want to help people in this way. And so I can't help but get to know them, and then when they make choices that I can't change and I can't support, then I have to kind of step back, which is so hard as a instructor. Um, but when I do that, it is like I can feel it like a bad breakup,
Hmm.
and it weighs on you, like you said. It's one of those things that I've tried to avoid, since I didn't know that that's what it was called, but I am glad to know, because I've tried to create kind of more of a boundary now,
Yep.
with
Yep.
students, just to keep it in check, and the the other one that you were saying, the emotional exhaustion is, oh,
Yeah.
compassion fatigue.
Yep.
Yeah. I think that is it. I feel like I don't get. ugh, It's hard to say that I get like fatigued of being compassionate. It doesn't feel like that so much. It just
Okay.
it because I feel like I don't lose compassion. I just can't display it anymore.
Okay. Yep. Well,
I just
that works. Yep.
yeah, I just couldn't output it. And it's like I've already said sorry. I've already tried this, and then you start to get into those mental loops of I've already done this, I've done this, like why aren't they getting it?
Hmm.
And you're like, but I care about them. They're gonna get it. It's gonna be okay. But you're constantly cycling through that loop. And so feeling compassion fatigue just definitely feels to me like I love you guys, but I can't give it to you. I
Yep.
can't give any more to you today. I have
Yep.
nothing to give.
Yep. It's that cup mentality. You only have so much. If your cup is already full and you add more stuff
Yeah.
to it, it spills
Yeah.
over. That's basically what compassion fatigue is.
And it's really easy to get there with our line of work, I think, because like you said, and we've said this whole time, that they come in after the fact.
Hmm.
And with all that baggage and that trauma and it all being so close, relatively speaking, like in time, um, it's very hard to weed through.
Yep.
It's very hard to get past and keep consistent with
Hmm.
your compassion, with your teaching, with your lessons, like all those things, whether they're spiritual or physical. You have to know where you end and someone else begins. And the compassion fatigue, like I said, I didn't know that that's what it was called, but now that I'm thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, there's times where I just don't want, there were so much negativity,
Hmm.
and there's so much like heaviness about dealing with people who are so close to trauma, because you're kind of trying to hold it's gonna, an egg that's about to shatter,
Yep.
right? Because at any moment it could just go.
Well, I mean, it's the issue about like the weight of knowledge skews your perspective of the world and those things around you. So, like the case of dealing
Okay.
with, say, PTSD, hypervigilance is a big part of that, where you
Yes.
constantly are dealing with threats, and threats are always there, and you're always preparing to respond to it. And as a result of it, you can't relax. Now, one of
Hmm.
the interesting like things about hypervigilance, and it's kind of trained into combat instructors, into self-defense
Mm.
instructors, because you're constantly scanning for threats and doing threat identification and escape
Yeah.
routes. So it's already there. What is
Hmm.
different is like the reason and responses as to why that is there. And but it's an interesting line to make sure you're not that you don't cross. Or I mean, if you do, it's just how do we manage there? And the other thing that's also interesting is in dealing with all this weight of knowledge
Hmm.
is when we're making sure we don't displace and project our own onto others. That's really hard in having that accountability,
Yeah.
because what it does is it creates some professional negligence on our part by not being physically fully present there to
Hmm.
impart this knowledge. And
Hmm.
that's being mindfulness and aware of that
Yeah.
is, I mean, it takes work. It just does.
Yeah, and being able to step back and see yourself like starting to get that fatigue before you hit fatigue is also super important. That's
Hmm.
where a lot of awareness comes in because you can't help people
Yep.
unless you are taking care of yourself too.
Yep.
And with the hypervigilance, like in the PTSD and stuff, like you're gonna see so many like facets of what trauma can display
Hmm.
when you're pumping someone full of adrenaline and you're pushing them into the fight zone. That's emotionally exhausting.
Yep.
Like that is an emotionally exhausting experience. I get done with a seminar and I am in bed because it just took every emotion out of me to convince these women to step into their power and to fight.
Hmm.
And when they don't want to, it can be hard sometimes to be like, you know what, then do what you want. Like do what you're gonna do, and
Hmm.
I let go or whatever. But I
Well, I
feel
mean,
like there's a difference.
yeah, and I mean, it's also the same like role playing
Mm,
these things, because
mm-hmm,
like the mental accountability as a man stepping in to help illustrate and demonstrate how to deal with a man's violence toward a woman,
mm.
having to put myself in that mindset of actually giving them the response up into the point of the line, that tapping into that darkness and that potential for darkness can also be very damaging, if not uh, scary for a man.
Yeah, and you can also trigger them, right? And the
Hmm.
moment that that this person is triggered, you've lost them.
Yep.
It's no longer fight through it because they're gone. They're hijacked by their amygdala. Even if they fought through it and they did a really good job, their experience of it was not what you would expect and not something that we want to put people back into.
Yep.
And it is hard. It's the hardest thing that you'll ever go through, I think. To be honest, like to put yourself out there into these situations, into these spaces, and to come out and to be spit out the other side a higher being.
Hmm.
Like it's just not something a lot of people can experience until you go do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's that resiliency paradox. We build resiliency
Yeah.
and toughness at the behest of a lot of pain
Mm,
and a lot of
that makes
trauma.
sense.
So,
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about you? What's your why?
so my why it has changed over the years. Now, the why that I continue to do the stuff that I do is because I love it.
Hmm.
More importantly, like Filipino martial arts.
Hmm.
There's a connection to my heritage, my culture, and I just love it. That is why.
Yeah.
Now, as for all the other stuff, I mean, it's been because it's what I do and I'm familiar
Yeah.
with it. But it really boils down to I just love what I do and it makes me happy. Now, caveat to that is I don't do the stuff that doesn't make me happy anymore. I don't, I have incredible boundaries as to whom I allow into my circle,
Hmm.
what I'm teaching them, how I'm engaging with them as to the content,
Hmm.
and being very upfront with them as to this is what I am offering and this is where I'm willing to go. And if it doesn't work for you, then that's fine. I'm fine with I'm fine with saying no. I'm happy with
Yeah.
saying no.
See, and I had to get there. Like,
Yeah.
I could say yes to every woman who walked into my door. Like, if they needed something, then I would, boom, on the table. I got you. And
Yep.
saying not having, because I mean, I have unfortunately had that experience where higher level predators or instructors were inappropriate and
Hmm.
in some ways, and that as a woman is very difficult to also deal with. And when you're talking about like a man environment, like you don't have a lot to say, you're just re-victimized,
Yep.
and
Yep.
you have to and knowing that as a woman, knowing walk away when to walk away even from an instructor
Hmm.
is the right thing, nay, the necessary thing to do, because you're not going to see that right up front, right? Like
No.
how do women when they come into your gym, how do they react when you start to get into things
Yeah.
like
Well, and that's hard. And that takes experience and presence of mind of the
mhm,
instructor. And the
yes,
fact of the matter is, for me, I didn't fully have the work done for myself to actually be fully cognizant and present and professionally correct into my approach of stuff because I was still working through a lot of my own trauma. I mean,
Mm,
homelessness as a teenager, violence as a kid, recurring alcohol
mm,
and drug addiction stuff, plus combat and all the messiness that is life attributed to life. So I hadn't done that work, and until the catastrophe occurred, I mean, I wasn't forced to do the work. Now, fortunately, I was given the opportunity to do the work,
mm,
and now that
mhm,
I can do stuff now from a point of an elevated, enlightened perspective,
mhm,
that comes at the behest of I have some solid boundaries, and I have some things that actually allow me to do the things and keep in perspective. For one, I don't have to do this to make a living. I don't have
mm,
to teach martial arts to make a living. I don't have the overhead of trying to maintain opening keeping the doors open. I don't
mhm,
have the accountability and the constant yes man approach to like, yeah, sure, I'll take
mm,
that on. Yeah, I'll take that on
yeah,
because I'm
yeah,
chasing the dollar. And that
right,
eliminates the ego and the disingenuous approach to things
yeah,
because I'm trying to maintain a business. So that has allowed me to get to this space. Now I know a lot of people aren't afforded that opportunity, and I appreciate their struggle and their hustle. But
mhm,
in the end of all this, coming back to the backyard has been incredibly cathartic for me.
mhm, mhm. I feel the same way. So I don't know a lot of people who like actually know this story, but
Hmm.
when I was living in Utah, I was running a gym and everything, and things were
Hmm.
going good, but I experienced a lot of the repercussions of trauma and the exhaustion
Hmm.
and just taking on way too much. And so I just decided to merge it with another gym. And I went up to Idaho to help my mother
Hmm.
through a surgery. And while I was up here, I just couldn't get over the space.
Yep.
Like I couldn't get over the breath that I had, you know. And so I decided to stay up here and to make a better choice.
Hmm.
And even though like I'm back, you know, in my garage, I've I've never felt I've never felt like a better instructor
Hmm.
because before I showed up for my students who are, you know, in the middle of trauma, I have to have my trauma sorted. You know, I
You have
have
to
to
put
have
a
my
mask
shit to
on. Yeah.
yeah, otherwise like you're sitting there being like, what do I do? What do I do? I can't even work on my own trauma. How do you give someone coping skills when you don't even have them? You
Hmm.
know, and this that just goes back to the uneducation and I think that I don't know if it's not serious about it or they're not or you're not aware of it, but it comes back to trauma training and making sure that like mental health professionals can be involved or at
Hmm.
least give your instructors a basis for how to handle, you know, women who are jumping back into trauma in their minds. You
Yep.
know, but all that to say, going back down, bring it all back to me, bring it all back to this moment, no longer like worrying about the gym, the overhead, like all the stresses that went with building a community. Like
Hmm.
it is so hard to build a community. And I just think that with the growth that I have had as well with going to therapy, you know,
Hmm.
making sure my mental health is treated and that I am, you know, doing all the things that keep me there, you know, that
Yep.
keep me in that space. I become a better instructor and I absolutely love having a little bit of a smaller and more intimate space to work in.
Yep.
I don't know how
Oh,
you feel
here's
about that.
Oh, I am in full agreement with you. Segue to that. I mean, we go to a physical fitness trainer when we're physically deficient. It
Mhm.
is fair to say that we should go to a mental health professional if we are mentally and emotionally deficient. And I
Yeah.
feel that the community at large is shifting towards that because
Yeah.
let's face it, 20 years of war has forced some very simple or some very hard truths in reality with the scope of our community and the regards of how we address violence and thereafter, especially war trauma. Period. And
Yeah.
men have been thinking about this for as long as men have been thinking, um, and now we're actually doing something about it. Now, here's an interesting question. I normally don't interact with the comments, but here's one. Have you ever been caught by surprise by your own response while teaching?
Oh. Yes. I have snapped,
Hmm.
where a student was just being just a total dick, and I, kind of came at him a little bit, and I was like, I'm so sorry, I don't know where that came from. Other times that I'm surprised that I've reacted is like when I choke someone out. Like, so scenario, I have to give context to this
Yep. Yep.
because I was with a student who tried to, they all do, right? A new student who tried to pull a move on me that they think they know.
Yep.
And so but it ended up like resulting in an injury to me,
Hmm.
and I ended up choking them out, and I didn't let go right away.
Mm.
And I was like surprised because when I was fighting a girl in the ring,
Hmm.
she started to cry. And I think I just knocked the wind out of her, but she started to cry, and I stopped and I was like, "Are you okay?" Like, I
Yeah.
felt bad. And I immediately stopped, and everyone's like, "Keep going." And I was like, "Oh my God. Oh my God. Okay." And it wasn't and so that reaction to me was just a lot different. And I think that I was triggered and felt that I needed, the moment that you can kill somebody is probably the time that you don't have to, is
Hmm.
something like that I've heard. But I do think that there is something to the emotional disruption that comes when you're training somebody
Hmm.
who goes back into trauma, especially one that is fresh and can go back into trauma so easily.
Yep. Had an unfortunate circumstance where faced with forward physical aggression with somebody with a knife, I had a private client just cave
Yeah.
down into fetal position and just terrified because I had no idea until it was explained to me later that they were present as a child when that occurred to their mother.
Oh God.
And yeah,
Heavy.
and just like the weight of responsibility of knowing these things or even
Mhm.
finding out after the fact, because this will segue to a hard thing that I'm processing through is the weight of accountability of things after the fact. Here in my little town of Homer, Alaska, which is a lovely little town hamlet by the edge of the sea with a population of 5,000, we have a fairly safe community because our lack of population and just the
Mhm.
community here is really safe. There's a good reason why I live here because growing up in Southern California, doing the gangbanging thing as I was doing as a teenager, I got into some unsafe situations. So, and also being stationed in Texas and just living life where I'm constantly fighting. It's just not peaceful. So I move up here for peace, and
No.
also the fact that this is my wife's hometown. Now, segue into the situation. So Homer is a beautiful little shire by next to the sea. It's fairly
Okay.
protected, innocent, and to a point naive, and the world is starting to crouch in on it. One of the things that occurred is there was a very heinous murder. It was a rape murder that occurred here in town against a person named Duffy, and she was a compromised protected individual because she was a behavioral health client of the local behavioral health community. She
Mm.
was assaulted, raped, and murdered by the DSP attached to her. The thing that and her body has yet to be recovered, and it's been several years. They finally caught the man who did this, and here's the kicker. He was one of my athletes.
No.
Yeah. Okay, here's the even further part. He was dating one of my staff members and was highly involved with my family and programs because he was part of our transitionary program for people going through recovery. He
Okay.
was a
Okay.
veteran. Okay. He was
Yeah.
dating one of my staff members. His
Okay.
children played with my children. He came to my home often. I had no
Wow.
idea. Yeah, I
Yeah.
had no idea because I had let the guard down because I've had all these things that accepted and allowed him to be because he came highly recommended. He was on the team. All these things that allowed me to remove the guard and not just like view him as a threat because I accepted that he wasn't a threat and come to find out that he was. And
It's
the
int
weight of, yeah,
No, I was just gonna ask, like, because as you walk, because that's always how it is, right? You look back in hindsight and you're like, "What the f happened?"
yeah.
What did happen? What were the first reactions, and why? sorry, not the reactions. What were the first red flags that you kind of reflected on? Because no one just goes and murders somebody. Was he like overly aggressive?
So, long story short, he had histories in the army where he had some disciplinary issues that were violence towards women, but never went anywhere because it stayed at the company level and never led to prosecution. Okay.
Okay.
So there's that. And then there was just habits and behaviors that he was exuding, just in general, that a lot of people just accept it as maybe because this is his recovery process because he's a recovering alcoholic and opioid abuser.
Yeah.
He's got veteran combat trauma, so he's a little off in that. So we give him a lot of grace and space. So
Yeah.
we allow that. But those flags we painted with the wrong brush and we accepted because of we thought that was that. But in
Yeah.
fact, it was an underlying issue of this is who he really was. He was a
Yeah.
predator.
Oh,
And
I have dated a higher level predator at the gym.
yeah.
And he used to, whenever I would like act out, he would take the gym and spar with me and like knock me out or like kick
Yeah.
me in the face or something. And it was just like, obviously that was like, you make mistakes. You don't date your instructors, don't date your students, like just
Yep.
don't do it. And you'll be fine. Everyone will be fine. The gym will be fine if you just live by that principle. But I think that when you get caught off guard so effectively, it can shake your faith in yourself as an
Oh yeah.
instructor, let alone a human being, that you could be so tricked, you know?
Yeah.
But again, we talk about this like it's just one more tool in your tool belt. You know, it's just one more experience that you got to look back on and say, I am, I imagine that there might be a little bit of like, there might be some feelings to what happened to her and, him being your student,
Yeah.
there has to be some deep emotions there. Like, and how did you end up working through them?
I'm still working through them, to be honest. And it's the issue of like responsibility. Is it my responsibility? Was it my responsibility to protect the world from this man? The answer is no. Is it my
Yeah.
responsibility to protect him against for my students? The answer is no.
Yeah.
My responsibility as an instructor was to teach my students what I was hired to teach them
Right.
from a
Right.
clearly clinical and professional standpoint. Now, the caveat to all that is my accountability as a human being who's empathetic and compassionate to those whom I love. That responsibility in trying to reconcile that is hard because here's the other part. This is the responsibility that I take accountable for. Is during this time I was not all there anyways because I had the weight and burnout of the business, the gym,
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
ends meet, going through my own trauma and recovery and all those things. I was not 100% there for my business, my athletes, my life, my family. It just wasn't. So it's fair to say that I didn't have the opportunity to deal with that because I hadn't gone through the work in the process, and I even wasn't even there mindfully there to deal with it. So
Yeah.
that is something that I have to reconcile, and this is where like talks like this is really helpful for that to reconcile what was because I know that I'm not alone in this situation. That
Yeah.
other instructors have had to deal with these things, these massive fuck ups that kick them in the balls really hard, but they have
Yeah.
to get up. They have to figure it out afterwards. And the fact is, instructors, they're not superheroes.
No. No.
They just
And
decide to stay with it.
I had a student one time who he ended up being a child. He was on the list. He was
Yeah.
on the sexual deviancy list or whatever. I
Yeah.
don't know why I lose my words. I literally say these terms all the time, and then I'm like, what's the word again?
Yeah.
But I didn't know. And it wasn't until someone brought it to my attention that I was like,
Oh
he's like
shit.
he's like the nicest person in class, but here I am training him around children.
Hmm.
And I felt very, very guilty about that. I felt like it was my responsibility to keep them safe. And here I was bringing this predator into our family, so
Yeah.
to speak. and I felt an immense amount of guilt and shame because of the literal responsibility that I had to endure, which,
Yep.
like you said, it wasn't my fault. But now that I know, I've never gone through that again.
Yep.
You know
Again,
what I
like this comment right here. You don't know what you know. And again, we learn from our losses.
Yes, 100%. Ugh,
Yeah. Deep breath.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. So with all that in mind, coming out after all this, what what recharges your battery? What refills you? What keeps you present to hold the line, keep doing the good work, and also find some peace amongst all of that chaos? What, more importantly, what makes you happy or happiest about what you do?
I think what makes me happiest about what I do is like, I think this is so, and it's such like a trope, but like seeing that light bulb moment
Hmm.
when they're like, oh, but deeper than this. Like when I see a woman who's in an extremely abusive relationship and she walks away,
Yep.
you know, you notice like, walk away, come back, walk away, come back. But that last time that she walks away and she really takes it seriously, like you can't beat that. You can't beat someone stepping away from death, you know, like choosing life, saying yes to that.
Hmm.
um that makes me that makes me kind of keeps me going. Other things is training myself,
Hmm.
you know, getting in my own training because I started this because I love that. I'm the technician. I love it. And it's just has been about finding that entrepreneurial part, the creative part that's been the most difficult.
Yeah.
But you still got to do what you got to do, I guess. And it makes me happy. Like it makes me happy to have these conversations because it helps me to, I'm an external processor.
Hmm.
And so it just helps me to process everything too and to think about things from a totally different perspective as far as like our discussion on men to women and our experiences with very heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Like this isn't easy stuff and it's not just something that people just are like, "Hey, let's just go through this." You
Yeah.
know? And especially when you would think that after our traumatic experiences as children through young adulthood, through adulthood even, that we would be less inclined to fight more. But I want to fight more. And I want to
Hmm.
fight more for what I want. That's
Yep.
the difference is knowing that I can fight and, and trusting myself that I'll show up. You know, I'm going to show up for the fight and translating that into the fight of life and
Yep.
taking those principles and all of those behaviors with you through your actual day to day. You know, when you show respect to somebody in the gym, you show respect to them outside. You know, I usually, when I say thank you, it's just habit now because I just find it respectful and I
Hmm.
want to be respectful to people, you know, and you take principles that you're teaching your children and you're teaching the kids in the gym, you're teaching the adults in the gym. And if you just apply those to life, that's what makes me happy. It creates continuity in my life. It creates resonation between my
Hmm.
inner world and my outer world. You know, it's a beautiful process.
And that is a beautiful reason to explain why we fight.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
And it also, like I said, the light bulb moment is what makes me happy. The being able to work out myself need is a
Hmm.
need because that's what takes care of like my mental health. Spending
Hmm.
time like with making sure I show self-care.
Hmm.
So spending time with my family, spending time with myself, you know, just doing the therapy, doing the hard work. Like all those things make me happy. Hard work makes me happy. You
Yeah.
know, it's funny because I'll do CrossFit and I'm like, I just love moving hard, heavy things from point A to point B. That's it.
I get punched in
Simple.
the face even though I'm not supposed to anymore. So yeah.
And well, when you're from such a traumatic background, like sometimes getting punched in the face is the only display of love that you ever know,
Yeah.
and so it can feel that way. And
Um, yeah.
no, go ahead.
Oh, I'm just saying it's one of those things about like shared suffering because there's the communal bond aspect of if I'm getting punched in the face by men and women that I love, then it's a shared community thing because it's not abuse. This is we're here
No,
for the betterment of the tribe. So
a
I
hundred
accept that
percent.
fact.
And
Yeah.
all of those people are there consenting. That's
Yep.
the other best, that's the other part is like, we're all here to do the hard work. And this is the conduit that we have chosen to help us through and help us break through that. And that's what it was for me. It was the best displacement that I could have displayed, because at first I was not displaying it in a good way. I was an angry teen,
Hmm.
and I would fight all the time. Like, if someone looked at me wrong, I was like right there to be like, why are you looking at me? And just always looking to pick that fight. And so I knew that going into fighting was going to be on some level natural for me.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason would make me happy.
Yeah.
And that's not normal. Like, it's not.
No, but the fact is, we live abnormal lives because, well, not everybody's going to do the hard work, and we need the abnormal people who are willing to do this kind of stuff to allow the grace and space for us to have this wonderful, highfalutin society that we love to live in, but that comes at like the people on the fringes
Yeah.
fighting on the frontier to make sure that everybody in the middle stays safe.
Yeah.
It's interesting when the aspect of fighting and violence is this issue that coming after the fact, the locus of control. When we choose to engage in violence, from the aspect of an instructor who's been there, done that, as you're choosing to engage in violence. Very rarely is it something that happens to you. You're making a choice.
Right.
And where it ties to trauma, especially like combat trauma, one of the key things that they note is this issue about the locus of control. Such in case of like the poor little E2 out there sweeping mines with a stick, he's
Mm-hmm.
constantly in that trauma fear response of what if, whenever. And it's reactionary to them. They're that victim response.
Right.
And some could say that to some of the women who suffered violent criminal violence towards them because they didn't have that locus of control. The caveat to that is having the option to choose when to engage with violence violently or non-violently allows I would say, help mitigate some of that violent trauma response.
Yes. I feel like, because like it becomes an obligation to
Hmm.
yourself. Like, if I am violent, and in Krav we have these levels of kind of principles. Like, the first thing we want to do is beat the civilian.
Hmm.
The second thing we want to do is beat the boxer. The
Hmm.
third thing we want to do is beat the Muay Thai artist, then the Jiu-Jitsu artist, and the Kali. Like, as we get into that stuff, and so it really has to build on one thing after another. And sorry,
That's fine.
um, this principle. Oh, I am gonna punch myself right in the head for this. Remind me what you were saying.
Oh, talking about like locus of control, choosing
Yes.
when to act with violence, violently or non-violently.
So the most important thing is to know like who you're fighting,
Hmm.
and that in and of itself can bring about so much control, and being able to translate that and flip that switch. You're not just going to do that.
Yeah.
It's not just our natural response is fight, flight, freeze. It's not, hey,
Hmm.
flip the switch and get aggressive. That's the response. Like, no, that's not the response.
You're saying that we don't just see red and go into a rage.
I mean, we do, and that's the worst part, is like,
Hmm.
is when is going into a rage, because
Hmm.
I don't want, like, the warrior does not engage in that type of behavior and in those types of emotions, and he does not acknowledge it, especially when he's in the fight.
Hmm.
You can't go into a fight emotional.
No, you can't. And this is the part. So, combat sports. The fight in combat sports is in the gym
Hmm.
against you and your preparation.
Hmm.
The fight, so to speak, in the ring, in the cage, whatever, that is a celebration of that combative process of fighting,
Mm,
your
that's
preparation
beautiful.
leading into it. So,
Hmm.
and that part, that mindfulness is really important to like understand the difference as to fighting in the ring is beautiful. It's a celebration of life, hard work, and experience for both
Yeah.
parties.
Yeah.
And if we do the work ahead of time, fight that fight, and win that fight, it is fair to say that when we do work and are faced with adversity outside of that, we have a higher opportunity to succeed and celebrate having done the hard work in preparation.
I like how you use the word celebrate to kind of describe like the end process of what that looks like, because when you're at the end of your line with
Hmm.
in a life or death situation, I don't know anyone who doesn't take their first breath after they've survived a violent encounter with a little bit more presence,
Yeah.
a little bit more mindfulness, because that changes perspective. That
Yeah.
instantly changes perspective when, you have something that can shock you so effectively right back into yourself. It's kind of those moments where we start to question, right? Like, why are we here? What are we doing? What is the purpose of everything? Like, unfortunately, it is through trauma sometimes where you get shoved back into yourself. Like when a
Hmm.
loved one dies, like, you start perspectivizing, wondering, like, what about their life? What about your life? And it's humbling.
It is. And what is beautiful about the human experience, despite being at the behest of a lot of pain, that
Hmm.
power can come and create this beautiful mosaic of just experiences to allow us to like draw from
Hmm.
and build from and
Hmm.
hopefully help others. And that's finding the power and connection with that with other people,
Hmm.
and as they go through their own process of pain and recovery and
Yeah.
trauma is incredibly impactful and powerful for everybody. And but
Yeah.
that comes with the responsibility of making sure that we have done our work, that we're present and mindful of it, and we're resilient enough to deal with it. And if we're not, we have the coping mechanisms and boundaries set in place to make sure that we aren't as fragile as the things that we're trying to handle.
Yeah, I think that makes a good point, because it that the when you're talking about the warrior mindset, like one of the principles is stoicism, right?
Hmm.
And his ability to suffer, just literally to suffer and just not show it on your face.
Hmm.
And I think that since starting self defense or fighting or whatever, like my just ability to suffer
Hmm.
um, it's changed. Like I think that I can suffer, and going through a childhood like yours or mine, you learn to suffer and how to smile through it.
Hmm.
And you learn how to find the positivity in the worst places. And when we work inside the gym, we're going to the worst places that we can think of in the physical world to try to initiate and engage you without setting off your fight, fight, or freeze,
Yeah.
trying to engage you into that mindset.
Yeah. Because the thing that I've found, and I find this with a lot of other like people who've gone through a lot of violence, is people who've actually gone through real violence, is that they don't have this chip on their shoulder of constantly having to prove their worth, their
Isn't
efficacy,
it
their quality
annoying?
of life. Yeah, it really is.
It
People
is
who
so
actually
annoying.
have,
I'm like,
yeah, people who've actually fought, they don't care. They can just like, okay, you're gonna hit me, I want to hit you, we're having a good time. And that
yeah,
that confidence is won out through resiliency. And that
yeah,
resiliency is, I mean, you're facing adversity constantly, succeeding and failing, because failing is part of the process. It's actually more poignant and beautiful part of the process, because from our losses we learn most
mhm,
about ourselves and how we face that adversity the time
mhm,
thereafter.
yeah.
So again, people who've actually been there, done that, and succeeded all the way through, they have nothing to prove. And
Well, and that's
that's
why we're
yeah,
instructors. That's why we're instructors. And that's why it's
yeah.
so important to us to have instructors that really embrace this idea. Because when you don't have instructors that embrace the idea, it's careless, right? We talked about they don't have the life skills.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what it comes down to. When you have somebody who survived a traumatic experience, like they have some life skills,
Yeah.
so you can't be going in there bullshitting your way just because they don't know what they don't know,
Yeah.
kind of situation.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, we've been going at this for almost 2.5 hours. I appreciate everybody hanging out with us, going through this, and you sharing your story and your process. Um, but I don't want to take up too much of your time today.
no,
Would
no,
you
you're
would you like to come back on again?
If you would have me, I would love to come back on. I would love to.
Absolutely.
This has been so fun.
Absolutely. I'm
And I
glad to
love
have you
that
back
we
on.
I love that we could cross borders not only between the men and the women, but the spiritual and the physical and bring it all into one kind of ecosystem.
Hmm.
That really envelops what martial arts and what martial artists really are.
Yep. Because we often focus on the martial side and forget about the art side. Because like the constant
Yeah.
debate is like pressure testing. It's like, well, there's much more to it.
I really do want to talk about pressure testing because I don't believe in it the way that I used to.
Yep.
And so, like, one of my good friends, he was like, I'll test um, Miss Megan for
Hmm.
Dr. Megan for her black belt, but I'm going to go really hard on her. And I was just like, well, no. I'm like, she's a captain in the army. She's a goddamn doctorate. I've watched her like save her, her own life several times. I've watched her through several different tests. I'm like, she doesn't need that.
Nope.
We don't need to see that. It doesn't make sense. But as I keep getting older and stuff, I'm like, you don't need any of it. Like any of these insane tests that are built to just I think you need that in the army when you're breaking people down to
Yeah.
build them back up. But in the
Yes.
gym, you're not trying to break somebody down any more than any more than they're already broken down there.
Yep. And this is where like pressure testing, and I'm just throwing this as an aside because I'm the rubber chicken guy. There's a reason why. Because one, I love rubber chickens because they're funny, but I also use it as a bridging tool to poke fun at my own community and also to talk about very difficult things.
Yeah.
Because again, dealing with knives are scary. People who use knives nefariously are scary, and therefore there's
Mhm.
that mentality of how do we deal with knives and
Mhm.
pressure testing. Now, people get so fixated on it about the violence of it. So I use the rubber chicken to help bridge some of that, like bringing you outside of that super serious mindset of that this has to be kill, kill, kill. When the fact
Right.
is, we're trying to figure out movement patterns, figure out our what we're really pressure testing is dealing with violent, aggressive intent. Because if I'm intending to stab you with a spork, rubber chicken, knife, or whatever, you're dealing with the
Mm,
human
yeah.
that's trying to conduct violence, not the tool. Now,
Yeah.
I get in trouble about that all the time, but
Really.
yeah, it's funny. I'll,
Why?
I'll, because there's this issue, and this goes back to fighting. Okay, people who have not fought and never been in real violence have a chip on their shoulder because they want to believe that the things that they do and the people who came before them works. The fact of the matter is, it does. What we're trying to do is like rise to that occasion as the individual to prove that we can make it work for ourselves because we don't need to prove the system because the system already had done it.
Yeah. The system kind of proved itself a long time ago.
Yeah, so it's up
I
to the
totally.
so it's up to the individual to prove that they can do it. So again, the tool doesn't matter; it's the person.
Yeah, and I will often it's so funny that you say that because I will sometimes make my students do stress drills to Bach
Hmm.
or Beethoven because it doesn't nothing of this stuff matters when you're going into places and presence like that you can never replicate it in real life. Or sorry, you can never replicate it in the gym as if it was real life
Yep.
because it's a tube, right? And so when real life does hit, you want to be able to drown out the rest of it
Yeah.
and train or and flip the switch and be able to go.
Hmm.
Now the rubber chicken. That's awesome though. I think it's
Yeah.
amazing. Oh, sorry, someone popped up on my
No, no, it's great. So, seeing the question, and this is actually the question I get all the time, is am I differentiating between pressure testing the technique or tool or pressure testing the person? The answer is all, and the answer is none. And also, the answer is I'm testing the person because the
the
tool
answer is
doesn't
yes.
care. Yeah, the tool doesn't care. The technique doesn't matter if the
Mhm.
person can't do it, and if the
Yeah,
person doesn't have the presence of mind to be able to have the intestinal fortitude to process through it. Because
right.
the fact is, violence will either win or lose based upon us and our
Yes.
willingness to deal with it.
Yes,
So,
and pressure testing the person is,
mhm,
we were kind of saying it's like it is a necessity, but it's also something like that doesn't need to be for it's not the end all be all answer for every different scenario and every different test or anything like that. Pressure comes from circumstances, and you can create pressure in your day-to-day training.
yep,
You know, you don't need to test pressure.
mhm,
Pressure's pressure. And so what I like to see is I like to see technique. I like to see control. Um, like you were saying, I think earlier about being like 250 and having someone smaller than you, like the control aspect also has to be there for every instructor.
yep,
Like you can't be hurting your students while simultaneously training them to protect themselves. It doesn't
exactly,
make any
because you're creating a training deficit. And
exactly.
the other aspect I look at is what I'm trying to really see is the individual's capability to creatively think and critically think
Yeah.
in an adverse situation, regardless of what it is. Can they get pulled out of their lizard brain and brought forward to their forward thinking mind and actually execute the complexity of what they've been training, and more importantly, execute the things that are necessary to survive and thrive, not just like survive the engagement, but be able to process through all of that. So,
Yeah, and I think that in the gym,
mm,
you can tend to see like who's getting it and who's not getting it.
yep,
So I think that all of that testing, because I always say like we're practicing in the gym,
hmm,
you're doing Krav Maga out on the street.
that's fair.
Like,
Yep,
and when you kind of set the tone that way, it can change the dynamic in the gym a
yeah.
lot because then they bring a real life aspect into it.
Hmm. Now, here's the last one. Fun. Does fun have value in training?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you can't. I wouldn't. I no one wants to do something that's not fun.
yep.
Even inherently, like we say, like fighting isn't fun, but like
And
we do it for a reason, and we do it a lot. For a reason. It's not because we hate it. You have to remember that fun is probably one of the most important tools for learning.
mhm,
Is the only time that you see a child in their window of tolerance is when they're playing. That's how you know.
mhm,
And adults are just big kids. So,
yep. I constantly say that adult nerd life is the best life because we have weapons
yes,
and friends willing to play with us. Okay. Again,
exactly.
I had a long bonding session with my friend and training partner in the backyard all day yesterday, to include with this thing, but we were hitting each other with swords because that's fun. Okay. The willingness to beat the crap out of each other because we're not trying to kill each other, but we're having fun makes it sustainable.
Right. And just because someone comes there and is like, I'm not going to have fun,
Mhm,
doesn't mean that you can't show them a different time, show them that martial arts is not only very serious, but also good for the soul. Like it's good to
mhm,
practice. It's warms you up or something. But for people who are doing it out of necessity, you have to just find your why. You
yep.
can't rely 100% on you're going to feel happy through the whole thing.
Yep. Professional necessity is often the starting point is the reasons why, where it becomes like a point of sustainability for long
Mhm.
term. Because the fighting window of being able to compete and be a soldier is so finite. Okay.
Yeah.
Especially if you started very young. But like adult capability of violence professionally against other capable adults violently is such a small window. Now,
Yes.
if we want to continue doing that, and enjoy it, that's where the longevity standpoint is. That's where the art standpoint is. And that's the
Mhm.
internal side of which we can keep doing the things that we love through the different composition changes of our body, but it doesn't have, we don't have to stay at a professionally violent circumstance. And if you are staying there because that's your job, I respect you for that, and I understand the need because I've been there, done that as well. But
Mhm.
there's more to life after the fact, and we being mindful enough of like there's more to it than that.
There's, oh God, I can't, like, I'm sure I've read so many books, like from military books to just, civilian books to
Hmm.
just trying to understand where and why violence happens
Hmm.
and why we can't utilize it as a society
Hmm.
and in certain ways,
Hmm.
as women. Sorry, I mean society, as women. Um, and the the kind of thing I keep coming back to is that where it's mindset
Hmm.
and it's mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. Like
Hmm.
you just you're trying to accomplish a goal. It's all in the mindset. You've got to be resilient.
And that keeps coming back to the reason why. The
I know.
why
And
will
it all
change.
has to go back to that because
Yeah.
if you don't have the reason why, then you're doing it on a totally empty basis, and
Yep.
your gas tank is gonna empty out very, very quickly. Which, if you're serious about this, then you have to. This is a marathon. This isn't exactly a sprint.
Nope.
So,
Nope. And the reasons why will change over time, and they differ from person to person. And this again, going back to the professional immediacy, that's a good starting point. Again, going back to like teaching personal protection and self-defense to women, it's responding or in preparation to response.
mhm,
But where we become, or it can become healthy, is teaching the longevity
mhm.
and success in the lifestyle that accounts to it.
And what is your biggest, like? Because I constantly say that where I'm like, it's a lifestyle,
Hmm.
And for you, what does that? I kind of touched on. For me, a lifestyle means bringing the aspects of the gym into my everyday reality. But I can't do that realistically all the time. So how do you bring aspects of your training into your everyday life?
Well, as much as I would like to say I'm doing kata and some carenza throughout the house at every points of the day with random objects, which I am, but the fact is, uh, I'm not preparing for war. Okay, I've done that. Okay, I'm not preparing for war. What I'm doing is preparing for peace. Okay,
Yeah.
sounds very esoteric and woohoo, but the fact is, I am preparing for peace because in preparation for peace, that means I'm doing the things necessary to ensure my peace. That is,
Mm,
educating myself,
yeah.
physically conducting in necessary, hard, and fun things, putting in the physical work, the emotional work, building the stability for my family coming from building a beautiful bond and relationship of trust and
Mhm.
honesty with my spouse and my
Yeah.
children,
Isn't
forgiving
that great?
myself and forgiving others. Okay, building all those. If I, the man, internally am no longer valuable, am no longer capable of being the beautiful individual that I want to be, then all this has no value, has no reason. It's just another statistic that perpetuates violence in the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and
So,
I think oh,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I was basically saying, so what I do in response to that is I take the responsibility of myself to be the best of what I want to be and the man I'm trying to become for the betterment of others. And if I can show up that way, that's how I bring myself to prepare for peace. But
No,
it
I love
does, but it also comes out a lot of work. I do put a fair amount of training in, but I do play, but I also educate. I also do this kind of work. So,
Yeah, there's a lot of different things. Speaking of statistics, like if you fight, even statistically speaking, like we're trying to prevent the fight, but like because we can't control it, we're not trying to like keep you away in the sense of when it's time to fight, you're gonna know when it's time to fight.
mhm,
Does that make sense?
yep,
Versus versus the latter, like when you are uneducated, you don't know when the time is.
that is
You
correct.
can't you can't know. Um, it And if you like, I say you can't know because there's so much of a deficit that I don't think it's feasible to even ask like of that. But sorry, back to the statistics. We're trying to get you not just like to be we're just trying to get you away from the side of the statistic. Like everybody is a statistic at some point, and you have certain statistics. So if you're this close to the statistic, then we're just trying to walk you back away from being close to the statistic. Doesn't mean that nothing will happen. It just means that we're getting you further and further and further away from it happening.
Yep. And some of the things that we mitigate is by tremendous change in behavior and activity. So things that I have changed in my behavior and activity is one, I don't live in Los Angeles any longer. Two, I don't live in Texas anymore.
I
Three,
live in Utah.
yeah, I don't live, I'm no longer in the military.
Mhm.
I have no longer engaged in criminal gang activity as I did as a teenager. I no longer got into fights over ego and dominance.
Learn how to
and
say
over
no.
Learn to say no. Okay. I have bigger reasons why of consequence. I have a wife and beautiful children to worry about in consequence. So I don't put myself into those positions that would cause a potential for violence.
What
And
causes you more? Is it consequence or the reward?
oh yeah, the
Like
reward is peace. Yeah.
yeah. Is
Because
that
the
the
other
biggest one for you?
say again,
Is that the biggest one for you, or would you say it was protecting your family?
really it's peace. Okay. I cannot protect my family if I am not mindful and not present enough to protect them. Because if I'm more willing to engage, if I'm more willing to engage in violence, I'm not participating in peace.
It's true. If it's like thing and you give it, you have it unless you had it to give.
Yep, that is correct. I'm getting a weird feedback. I don't know if it's just my internet.
Oh no.
Well, with all that, I mean, this might be a good spot for us to close out. Do you have anything that you'd like to share with the community and things coming forward?
Yeah. So I will be launching training, going to start with women, obviously. We're going to build out some self-defense tools and build on the tools so that you are not do all the physical stuff and then have to try to guide for a minute to kind of get back and bring the student into a higher self. Obsessed because we're obsessed. You can actually sign up for my new website, selfdefenseobsessed.com. But
I will.
Facebook, Jen Marie.
Yeah, so here's the YouTube channel.
Yep, and here's my YouTube channel, which is Krav 2. I just go on there and I just post educational as we launch more and more.
And here is your website.
Yep, and you can join my newsletter. There she is happening. And train before, at least you would give a consideration about why has been used in the world and why it has been. Even just reading one book can give
Awesome. Well, it sounds like we're robots, so I'm going to close out, and I thank everybody for hanging out with us.
Yes, thank you, guys. Thank you.
Hiccups and everything. Yeah, make sure to follow us on YouTube. Here's Fight House Talks podcast on YouTube. Here's my nonsense if you want to view that.
Yep. View it, guys. I love it.
Yep. So,
Perfect.
everybody, I'm going to drop Jen down. I'm going to say thank you. And
bearing with me on some of my tangents, questions that you asked and didn't. I'm so sorry for any of that, guys. Love you. Fill all the gaps if that did happen.
awesome. We'll do a part 2. Be excellent. All right, guys. I'm going to do our outro. And yeah.